Did you know one of the earliest Mario games that never left Japan is Mario World? No, not Super Mario World, just Mario World. Although this title could be played on the Famicom, basically Japan's version of the NES, you needed some additional hardware to run it. The Family Basic was an accessory bundle for the Famicom, a cartridge and keyboard combo which made it possible for users to enter custom code and run it on the Famicom. It was created by Nintendo in collaboration with Hudson Soft and Sharp Corporation and was released on June 21st, 1984. The Family Basic was essentially Nintendo's attempt at grabbing the attention of PC users and getting them interested in consoles. This wasn't the only version of the device, however. The superior Family Basic V3 was released just 7 months later on February 21st, 1985, featuring more memory, a distinct red cartridge, and most notably, 4 built-in games. These games were all programmed using the Famicom Basic language to show everyone what it was capable of. 3 of the games feature Mario characters, but only Mario World actually lets the player control Mario. Mario must run, jump on springs, and climb ladders in order to collect the numbers 0 through 9 in order. Players can also collect apples and must evade 2 enemies, but nothing happens when everything in this single-screen game is collected. Players can only wait for the timer to run down to 0, resulting in a game over. For this video, we sifted through every single Mario game we could find that never came to America. But we decided we won't be covering games that the US later got through Virtual Console, on the eShop, or via Switch Online, like Mario's Super Picross, and we won't be covering region-specific ports that only have very minor differences, such as Super Mario 64's Shindo Pak-Tayo version. And with that said, back to the games. While Mario World is an interesting footnote in the early history of Japan-exclusive Mario games, it wasn't the first dedicated Mario game that never saw a Western release. That accolade goes to I Am a Teacher, Super Mario No Sweater. The title was made by Royal Kugyo in collaboration with Nintendo, and released on August 27, 1986, for the Famicom Disk System. In English, this game's name translates to something like I Am a Teacher, Super Mario's Sweater. And as you might have guessed from the name, it's all about knitting. This game, and we're using the term game loosely here, is essentially a knitting guide that walks users through the process of knitting Super Mario-themed sweaters. The player can choose to knit sweaters, sweater vests, and cardigans, and can even input measurements to change the size of the sweater being made, with the game adjusting the guide accordingly to accommodate the size. There's several designs to choose from, and the game even tells players how much yarn and which yarn they'll need to make a design. But the game's noticeably lacking one thing: it doesn't actually explain how to knit. This is a problem that Royal Kugyo and Nintendo must have known, as they released another game just 1 month later, I Am a Teacher, Timi no Kiso, which actually teaches players to knit, but lacks the Mario branding. Exactly 15 years later, on the day of August 27, 2001, Nintendo would release another game upon the world of fashion: Mario Family for the Game Boy Color. The game was first revealed alongside Kirby Family at Nintendo's Space World event in 2001, but it seemed to have little involvement from Nintendo itself. The title was developed by Natsume and published by sewing machine company Jaguar. This is because the game was made to work specifically with Jaguar's JN100 sewing machine via a special cable. Though this all sounds impressive, Mario Family is even less of a game than I Am a Teacher, Super Mario No Sweater. All this title does is let the user select a Mario pattern, then the sewing machine prints it out as embroidery. As you might have guessed, a Mario title that needed a sewing machine costing hundreds of dollars sold poorly. It's believed the game's poor sales likely resulted in the cancellation of Kirby Family, and probably killed what little chance this game had of coming to the West as well. But let's get back to Mario's earlier years. This next game actually recreates and remixes most of the original Super Mario Bros., but within the game engine of Super Mario Bros. 2: The Lost Levels. This game isn't just a reworking of a Mario title, however. It's themed almost entirely around Japan's all-night Nippon radio program, and is appropriately titled All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. But instead of taking place in the Mushroom Kingdom, it's set in the Viva Kingdom, which comes from the show's slogan, Viva Young. It also swaps out all of the Toads in Koopa's castles for hosts of the All Night Nippon show. Despite the differences, Mario's goal is still to rescue Princess Peach from King Koopa and free the kingdom's residents. The game was made by Nintendo in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System and published by Fuji TV. This game's tie-in deal came about after Fuji TV's sister company, Pony Canyon, published a Mario promo video a few years earlier. The promo featured a song that won an All Night Nippon contest, which asked entrants to put lyrics to the Super Mario Bros. Theme song, which caught Nintendo's attention. Continuing the trend of unorthodox releases, All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. Release was far from ordinary, and was almost exclusively distributed via a raffle on the All Night Nippon radio program to celebrate its 20th anniversary. The magazines Famitsu and Famimaga also got to raffle off 20 copies each to their readers, with winners getting their copies in early 1987. But they were the lucky ones. The game is quite rare to this day, with only 3,000 copies being made for its initial run, and a limited number being sold in a second wave via mail order thanks to overwhelming demand. This venture strengthened the bond between Nintendo and Fuji TV, and Fuji TV would go on to publish Yumikojo Doki Doki Panic, which, if you haven't heard, was reworked into the Super Mario Bros. 2 that we played in the West. So a deal based on reworking the original Super Mario Bros. 2 led to the creation of the Western Super Mario Bros. 2 that was just a reworked version of Doki Doki Panic. Not hard to follow at all. Since All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. Is built on top of the Lost Levels, there's no two-player mode like the original Super Mario Bros. Players just get the option to play as Mario or Luigi. There's a bunch of other differences too, like World 1 taking place at night, and lots of miscellaneous graphical changes that make the game line up more with the style of the Lost Levels rather than the original Mario. A few of the game's enemies have also been replaced. And as well as some differences with power-ups and iconography, some of the background mushrooms are also replaced with microphones. We have to say though, the game still has tight controls and is fun to play. We might find this game fascinating today, but it's pretty obvious why this game never left Japan. Western gamers at the time probably had close to zero interest in playing a Mario game based on a Japan-only radio show. Moving on to our next game, Punchball Mario Bros. Was entirely developed and published by Hudson Soft in 1984. Nintendo essentially had nothing to do with this game, other than loaning Hudson the Mario Bros. License. The game was available for several Japanese home computer systems, with each version having unique differences due to the specs of the machines. Although it may look like it, this isn't simply a port of Mario Bros. The game has new mechanics, like the titular punch balls, which can be tossed at enemies to stun and flip them. And the floor tiles don't flip over enemies if hit from below. To beat enemies, players must use the punch ball or POW block before finishing them off. Punch balls must be recollected once thrown, and can only be thrown while the player stands still. The game also has two difficulty modes, A and B, with B being slightly more difficult. As the game progresses, the stage design becomes more difficult, with moving platforms, and frozen moving platforms. Some phases are bonus stages where Mario has to grab 10 coins before the time runs out. If there's 2 players, it's a competition to get the most coins. Punchball Mario Bros. Also has an entirely different story that is, frankly, bizarre. We'll quote it verbatim from the game's manual. At some point, humans gained the ability to use tools. At first, they were simple things using the bones of animals and fragments of rock. Using their wisdom, humans improved their tools, harnessing fire, wind, and nowadays, even atomic energy. They began to build up a sophisticated culture. On the other hand, however, there are people who still only use stone. How do they catch game and defend themselves from outsiders, using only their strong jumping power and stone spheres? They use those skillfully to defend themselves. Here, we introduce two such people. It seems their names are Mario and Luigi. Will they ever learn about sophisticated culture? Punchball Mario Bros. Is a bit of a weird game, but the company also released a close match to the regular Mario Bros. Format. Around the same time as Punchball Mario Bros., Hudson developed and published Mario Bros. Special, with a similar release to Punchball in that Nintendo had little involvement. It was released on a variety of home computer formats, and the gameplay has some differences to the usual Mario Bros. Format. There are 4 different stages to this version, with the first requiring Mario to reach the top of the stage through a series of moving gaps in the platforms, before activating switches at the top of the screen in quick succession to unlock an exit. The second stage is made up of trampolines, which Mario can land on to stun enemies, before kicking them off, with the goal being to take out all of the enemies on the stage to unlock the exit. The third stage introduces conveyor belts and a lift, with the goal being to navigate the stage and collect dollar signs. The last stage plays similar to the original game's bonus stage, but with dollar symbols instead of coins, and a fairly strict time limit. Both Mario Bros. Special and Punchball Mario Bros. Were clearly successful, as they did well enough for Hudson to come back for more, but they released on hardware that wasn't very prominent outside the Far East, which basically kept them there. A couple of years after the release of Mario Bros. Special, 1986, Hudson released Super Mario Bros. Special, this time around changing up the format of the massively successful Super Mario Bros. This was the second Nintendo-licensed follow-up to their NES heavy hitter, being released just 2 months after The Lost Levels, but not for the Nintendo Home System. It was instead released on 2 home computers, the PC-8801 and the Sharp X1. Although this game appears to be very similar to the NES title, there are a number of new levels, and due to hardware limitations, no smooth horizontal scrolling, instead utilizing a screen-by-screen transition. This was done to different levels of success across the 2 versions of the game, with the X1 sliding the next screen into view, and the PC-8801 having the horrendous effect of turning the screen black before loading the next into play. What gives these titles an interesting twist over the original NES Super Mario Bros. Is their use of earlier power-ups and enemies from previous Mario titles, such as sidesteppers, fighter flies, fireballs, and even the rolling barrels or hammer power from Donkey Kong. All of these enemies utilize the same mechanics as their earlier appearance too, with Mario being unable to simply jump on them to defeat them, and instead needing to be taken out from below or with the use of a power-up. Nintendo also released their own quasi-sequel to the original Mario Bros. In the same year as Super Mario Special, Katakita Mario Bros., translating to Mario Brothers Have Returned. This updated version of the original Mario Bros. Game was ultimately the last Mario title to be published on the Famicom. The game brought a number of new levels, the ability to alter direction whilst in mid-air, retained high scores, and even the ability to register the name, age, and gender of players 1 and 2. The biggest addition, however, was the inclusion of a new game mode, called Nagatanian World, which enables players a chance to continue the game after running out of lives, though not without having to first win a spin on a randomized slot machine minigame. This chance is only offered once per game, but can reward the player with 4, 2, or just a single additional life after a game over. The main focus of this extra mode, however, is in its prizes. By attaining a score over a certain value, the game provides promotional codes which can yield real-world rewards. After scoring 100,000 points, a code is given which could be mailed to Nintendo for a chance to win a set of Mario playing cards. After 200,000 points, participants were in for a chance to win a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3, which had released just 1 month prior to Katakita Mario Bros. Win or lose, the entrant would receive a free Mario keyring, with the promotion running from November of 1998 to May 1989. Possibly the most interesting and somewhat unique addition to Katakita Mario Bros. Was its inclusion of advertising. These ads would appear during level transitions, advertising various Mario titles, such as Mario Bros. 3, but also, strangely, Japanese food company Nagatanian, who had sponsored the game's production. While this version of Mario Bros. Never came to America, a slightly altered version did see a release in Europe as Mario Bros. Classic Series in 1993. While some of the content of Katakita Mario Bros. Was removed, this version kept the improved controls and physics and had some additional graphical improvements. It was a good-looking NES title, just like our next two games. Family Computer Golf Japan Course and Family Computer Golf US Course are Japan-exclusive golf titles released for the Famicom Disk System on February 21st and June 14th, 1987 respectively. Japan Course uses similar gameplay to 1984's Golf on NES, while US Course is more similar to NES Open Tournament Golf. Japan Course stars both Mario and Luigi, while US Course stars various alterations of Mario. And this is actually where Mario's America outfit in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate originates. Both games have single and multiplayer modes, but US Course allows for up to 4 players, while Japan Course only has 2-player multiplayer. One of the most interesting aspects of these titles is that they both supported disc FAQs. Games that supported disc FAQs came on special blue discs and let players submit their high scores and personal data to Nintendo via special fax kiosks that could be found across Japan. Over 150,000 high scores were sent in to Nintendo across both games, with the best scores winning some enviable prizes. The top 100 winners of the Japan Course contest got a Champions Course Gold disc, which came with a special case and a gold plaque. Not only did the plaque have the winner's name and rank printed on it, so did the actual game's title screen. Another 5,000 entrants received the Pro Course Gold disc. This version is not customized, with the title screen simply saying prize winning. The top 100 winners of the US Course contest got a gold trophy, and the top 10,000 players overall got a gold cartridge of Punch-Out! But there was another special prize given only to players that scored a hole-in-one. Nintendo selected 1,000 of them at random and sent them all a special gold disc version of the US course known as Family Computer Golf prize card. The special versions of both Japan and US course also had an extra level. It's not clear why these games were never localized for the West, but it's also worth noting that NES Open Tournament Golf released only a few years after these games, and added even more polish to the gameplay and presentation, making these two games redundant. It's also a bit odd that a game that literally had US course in its name was never released in the US. Mario would make his way to a different type of course soon after, with 1987's Famicom Grand Prix F1 race for the Famicom Disk System. Players would be put behind the wheel of a Formula 1 race car, either on their own or against other Mario lookalikes on the track. Each car would have fuel and health gauges, which would deteriorate if the player drives off-road or whenever they crash into walls or other drivers. As with most racing games, these could be recovered by taking a dip into the pit stop for a brief period of time, repaired by, once again, a number of Mario lookalikes. Much like the Family Computer Golf titles, F1 Race had a tournament where the top 100 players for each of the game's 4 difficulty settings received a personalized trophy, along with a poster that featured the names of all 400 winners. All winners and runners-up also received a Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch, as well as a fake driver's license based on the game. The game proved popular enough to get a sequel in Famicom Grand Prix 2 3D Hot Rally. As the title suggests, this game played in 3D thanks to the supplied 3D glasses. However, the Mario Brothers only appear on the cover and cannot be seen in-game. The original Famicom Grand Prix F1 race was reportedly planned to release in the United States at some point, but the localization was scrapped. Mario and Wario is perhaps one of the more unique games to never be localized in the US, following the story of Mario and his friends exploring a magical forest. While in the woods, trying to confirm a legend they heard, Luigi gets lost from the group, and so the gang splits up and tries to find him. During the search, Wario drops a bucket on Mario's head. However, Wanda, the magical fairy that Mario and his friends were searching for, decides to intervene and help them out. Unable to remove the bucket, Wanda takes it upon herself to help guide Mario and his friends through a series of puzzles to reunite them with the lost Luigi. The gameplay revolves around using the Super Nintendo mouse peripheral to control Wanda. Clicking on objects makes Wanda interact with them, allowing the player to create a safe passage for the characters. The main aim is to have them meet up with Luigi at the end of each stage in order to remove Wario's unyielding bucket. The gameplay is often compared to the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, with some differences. Characters walk forwards automatically, so making sure they don't walk into danger is important. Each character has their own set speed, with Mario being faster than Peach and Yoshi being faster than Mario. Mario and Wario was designed by Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri and was developed by the team at Game Freak. This makes Mario and Wario the second title Game Freak ever created with Nintendo, after Yoshi on the NES. Their next time developing with Nintendo would be for the renowned Pokemon games. In fact, Mario and Wario even shares the same composer as Pokemon, Junichi Masuda. Many people also believe that the World 7 music of Mario and Wario sounds similar to the Route 24 and 25 track heard in the first generation of Pokemon games. There's even a sly nod to the game in Pokemon Red and Blue. When examined, the Super Nintendo in the Copycat's house in Saffron City states the game on screen shows Mario with a bucket on his head. This reference was even carried forward to the game's remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green. Bringing Mario and Wario to the West would have been a quick and easy process, as the game's text is written entirely in English. So why was it never localized? The answer to this is most likely its sales figures. The title sold relatively poorly in Japan, as did Mario Paint, which also used the Super Nintendo mouse. Mario and Wario sold roughly 500,000 copies in Japan, over 200,000 less than Mario Paint in the region. To put this into perspective, Super Mario World released 3 years prior and sold 3.5 million units in Japan alone. Also, seeing as Mario and Wario required the SNES mouse to function, the game would also be sold at a higher price if it were bundled with the peripheral. In Japan, Mario and Wario were sold bundled with the mouse for 9,500 yen, which back in 1993 was about $100 US. Since most SNES games were $50 at the time, this would probably have been a hard sell in the US market. That said, there is some evidence that there were plans to release the game overseas, even if only briefly. A preview for the game can be found in the September 1993 edition of Nintendo Power, which compared the game to Lemmings. Kellogg's Cereal also ran a competition that showed the box art of Mario and Wario among its prizes. Within the entry form though, no publishing date had been set, and the game simply had an estimated release of 1994. Now, almost certainly the rarest game on our journey today is Yoshi no Cookie Kurapon Oven de Cookie. This is essentially a more expansive version of Yoshi's Cookie, which released a year later, and was developed by National Human Electronics, a former division of Panasonic, to promote Panasonic's new Kurapon oven. Unlike the international version, this release of the game includes not just the content found in Yoshi's Cookie, but an additional mode which has Yoshi navigating a map in a similar manner to Super Mario World. Yoshi must navigate the small island, teaching the player how to cook real versions of the cookies featured throughout the game, such as the iconic checkerboard, heart, and flower cookies. Yoshi no Cookie Kurapon Oven de Cookie is considered a highly sought after and expensive collector's item, as only 500 copies of the game were ever produced. The SatellaView, a Japanese exclusive add-on for the SNES which we've brought up multiple times before on the channel, also had several Mario titles most of you probably haven't played or perhaps even heard of. The SatellaView would essentially connect to a digital radio broadcast to listen to music and, most importantly, download unique games or titles with special conditions. These were typically altered versions of a standard retail title, but there were a number of games made just for the SatellaView that were only available for a limited time. One of these was Undaki 30 Shark Turtle Battle Mario version, often shortened to Undaki Same Game. This game was developed by Hudson Soft and was also made available in a cartridge format with a limited run in 1995. Its gameplay is effectively just the classic solitaire card game Monte Carlo, whereby selecting two icons of the same type next to each other will remove both icons from play, with the goal being to remove all cards. Considering the game's simplicity, it shouldn't be surprising that it was distributed as a downloadable title via the SatellaView. This edition was broadcast every Monday at 5:30 PM, and as with many SatellaView games, it was accompanied by a radio show. It even starred Sugiyama Kazuko, the Japanese voice of Bomberman, and aired from April 1995 for about a year. The game also has the honor of being one of the few titles to support the Super Famicom mouse. Wario's Wood had its own curious remixed version made exclusively for distribution through the SatellaView. In 1997, Nintendo published Wario's Wood's Bakusho version, a game that saw a decent share of contention. The original game released on both the NES and SNES internationally, but only on the Famicom in Japan. The SatellaView title, which plays exactly like Wario's Woods, simply replaces various characters from the game with the comedy duo Bakusho Mondai. Around this time, many began to say that Nintendo was failing to deliver unique experiences with the SatellaView service, and this mildly altered version of a pre-existing title did not help their case. The company distributed a second version of Wario's Woods on the service called Wario's Woods Again, making very few changes from the international SNES version, and lacked a couple of game modes and dialogue in the game's story mode. Birdo was also MIA, replaced by the female SatellaView avatar. But the complaints surrounding remakes and rebranding of existing Nintendo games wouldn't stop with Wario's Woods. Nintendo's interest in live broadcast events was evident thanks to the variety of games available via the SatellaView, such as the quiz game series SatellaQ. Each week, a new version of SatellaQ would broadcast. Hosted by Toad, the quiz required players to not just answer a variety of questions, but also play a number of incredibly simple minigames. These quizzes would be rebroadcast at regular intervals, rather than being played at exclusive times each week. Toad would read questions for the player to answer through the system's SoundLink system, but music would also be broadcast ranging in styles from classical to J-pop and even British rock, with some tracks being used as part of the questions themselves. The next game on our list is BS Super Mario USA, a SatellaView timed exclusive follow-up to Super Mario Bros. 2, known as Super Mario USA in Japan. As with other SatellaView titles, it was released episodically over a period of 4 weeks, with each episode being on a strict time limit. Each episode featured a different world from Super Mario Bros. 2, with 3 stages and an end boss, using the updated 16-bit graphics from the Super Nintendo's Mario All-Stars release. Functionally, it is virtually identical besides some minor collision updates, but there are a few substantial changes to the overall gameplay. A 50-minute timer was added, which includes timed events that force the player to change character during play. Once the player finishes all 3 stages and defeats the boss, they're able to go back and freely swap between the stages at any time until the timer runs out. Most notably, a point system was added to the game. Players earn points by simply collecting coins, defeating enemies, or collecting special items, the most valuable of which is the Golden Mario statue. Not only does it give the player an extra life and refill their health, but is also worth 50,000 points. There's a total of 10 of these for each episode, 3 to collect from each stage, as well as 1 to be collected from the end of episode boss. The player has the opportunity to earn lots of coins and extra lives when the timer runs out. At this point, the player is thrown into the bonus chance for 3 minutes, where players can significantly increase the number of coins and extra lives, which will add to their final score. At the end of the episode, following the credit roll, today's results screen is shown, also including the player's extra lives. After the score has been tallied, players are asked if they want to submit the score for the Power Challenge tournament, with the winners being announced in a news broadcast on the SatellaView's internal newspaper. Each week, the top 10 highest scorers receive a limited edition t-shirt and certificate. The first place winner also got a physical golden Mario statue similar to that which appears in the game. Similarly to other BS titles, Super Mario USA made use of the SoundLink feature, supplying the player with voiceover for storytelling as well as hints and tips. Interestingly, none of the music or jingles featured in the game are from Super Mario Bros. 2. Instead, the soundtrack consists of music from Super Mario World, as well as the Japan-exclusive compilation CD Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, 3 Hop, Step, Jump. Excitebike Bun Bun Mario Battle Stadium, as you can expect with its title, was an Excitebike remake, or sequel if you will, featuring a lineup of Mario characters. The game was developed by Nintendo and released in 4 different episodes, with Episode 1 featuring Mario, Luigi and Toad, Episode 2 adding Wario, Episode 3 adding Peach, and Episode 4 adding Yoshi, though removing Luigi for some reason. Non-playable races would be different coloured Koopa Troopers. What's interesting about Bun Bun Mario was that it was entirely exclusive to the SatellaView. The game would be a wholly new creation for the 16-bit era, and the only entry in the Excitebike series for the SNES, with it being 3 more years before Excitebike 64's release. As an interesting aside, in the game's code, it's also possible to find a bonus game mode which would ultimately go completely unused. The title also featured voice acting, with one of Charles Martinet's earliest appearances as Mario. After Excitebike, Mario would revisit one of his oldest occupations, as a member of a building wrecking crew. The original Wrecking Crew was released in 1985 for the NES as a launch title, but the game received a 16-bit sequel for the Super Famicom called Wrecking Crew 98. First as a downloadable title with the Nintendo Power Flashable cartridge service in January of 1998, then as a standard cartridge release in May later that year. The game sees Mario return from a trip outside the Mushroom Kingdom, only to find Bowser constructing new hideouts across the kingdom. As a result, his new buildings are blocking out the sun, depriving the landscape of sunlight. In a bid to counter this, Mario sets out to demolish the new hideouts with his trusty hammer. On his journey, he encounters former adversaries from the original Wrecking Crew, including rival Foreman Spike. The game featured a full story mode, versus mode, and a tournament mode. Its premise is simple. Players break tiles to line up colours of 3 or more, whilst avoiding various hazards such as enemies that travel down the stage. It isn't quite the same game as the original Wrecking Crew released for the NES, but for those that wish to play that title, it has also been bundled within this new game as well. This title never had an international release due to the year in which it was published. Nintendo's different international divisions ended the publication of SNES games in 1997, a year prior to Wrecking Crew 98's release. It never even had a chance. One of the more unique exclusives Mario had in Japan was Mario no Photopea, more closely resembling a piece of software that would be unique in the Nintendo 64's entire library thanks to its implementation of smart media cards. Mario no Photopea released in 1998 and featured an array of photo editing tools, alongside puzzles that are constructed out of a player's compositions. Essentially, an early example of user-generated content in a console video game, and another example of Nintendo's attempts to stake a claim in Japan's continued push towards the home computer market. Lending itself to this, the cartridge itself featured 2 smart media slots, allowing for users to import their own images from a PC or digital camera. These images could be touched up using the built-in editing tools and even exported back to a PC or Fuji printing kiosk. Plans had been made to allow for compatibility with the 64DD floppy drive, which would have been a major inclusion when comparing the storage sizes of smart media to floppy disks, going from less than 2 megabytes to 64 megabytes. As a result of severe delays in the disk drive peripheral, however, this functionality was removed. That said, there were 4 optional smart media cards produced for use with this title specifically, all with preloaded graphics. These included a card for Yoshi and the Legend of Zelda, as well as Bomberman, and oddly, Sylvanian families. The next game series we're looking at was similar to Photopea, but actually once planned as a sequel to Mario Paint, the Mario Artist series. The Mario Artist Suite was created for the 64DD and is made up of 4 titles which can be used in conjunction with one another. The first game, Paint Studio, was released alongside the 64DD and in a bundle featuring the 64DD, Paint Studio, a Nintendo 64 mouse, and a RandNet internet service subscription. Its original title was Creator, then Mario Paint 64, before being renamed Picture Maker, then Mario Artist and Camera, until releasing in December 1999 as Paint Studio. Paint Studio launched alongside the 64DD and focused on utilizing the 3D potential of the N64. This title is probably the closest of all the Mario Artist games to Mario Paint, and is often described as a 90s kid-focused Adobe Photoshop. This first entry in the series was commissioned by Nintendo from UK studio Software Creations, who made creation tools for music production on the original N64. Players can use a variety of brushes, textures, or stamps to make art, and even animation. Various stamps of pre-existing Nintendo artwork can be used, including all Generation 1 Pokémon, a wide array of Mario characters, Banjo-Kazooie, Diddy Kong Racing, and a select few others. There's even a unique 4-player mode included in the game, allowing 4 players to paint at the same time. There's also 3 different 3D environments that can be explored: Mars, Underwater, and Dinosaur Land, where players move through the locations taking pictures of the creatures inhabiting them, similar to Pokemon Snap. Players can even edit the textures of some of these creatures. The next game in this mini-series is Mario Artist Talent Studio, released February 23rd, 2000. The software came bundled with the Nintendo 64 capture cartridge, an adapter that let users hook up an analog video source, like a digital camcorder or tape player, and record movies onto the Nintendo 64. The title is mostly an animation suite, letting players create their own 3D characters by choosing body proportions, facial features, clothing, hair, and so on. Players can also insert their own images onto 3D models. The models can then be used to make movies, with the characters dressed in various clothes and accessories, animated to sound and music, with special effects added on top. The game also supports the Transfer Pack, letting players connect a Game Boy camera to the system to take photos for use in-game, a feature that was originally planned for Perfect Dark before being removed. After Talent Studio came Mario Artist Communication Kit on June 29, 2000. The disc let players connect to the internet and RandNet's Net Studio, a service that gave users the opportunity to share their Mario Artist Suite creations with other RandNet users. The service provided a variety of contests as well as printing services through mail order. The disc for the communication kit also contains content that could be added to Paint Studio. The RandNet service ran for only 14 months before it was taken offline, effectively rendering the communication kit unusable. The last Mario Artist disc was Polygon Studio, releasing August 29th, 2000, with 3D graphics studio Nichimen Graphics heading the technical development. This entry in the suite has a 3D graphics editor and lets users design their own 3D models, though with only simplistic control. Originally called Polygon Maker, this game was announced at Nintendo's Space World event in 1996, but renamed Polygon Studio for Space World 1999. By connecting to RandNet servers, it was possible to order papercraft printouts of user-created 3D models, which were printed and sent to the user to be cut out and constructed as paper models. There's also some bonus minigames included in this entry, such as Sound Bomber, providing a selection of different minigames making use of the player-created 3D model within them, as well as Go-Go Park, which sees the player wind up their creation in order to have it stop before launching off of a cliff. The title even includes a particularly strange 3D area called the Experimental World. Within this environment are an array of toasters, toast included, which guide the player through the world so they can find new 3D objects to utilize within the model editor. Some parts are known as power blocks, which provide the creation with the ability to move more quickly. Paint Studios developers, Software Creations, claimed that the Mario Artist game suffered from Nintendo's American and Japanese divisions butting heads. Paint Studio originally included audio creation functionality, but it was decided to have this cut from the game and put into an entirely separate piece of software, though this would never be released. The Pickford brothers, who worked with Software Creations, claim on their website, Nintendo in Japan took control and rejected many of the ideas which had been accepted enthusiastically by the Americans, steering the project in a different direction after John left Software Creations to form Z2, and throwing away loads of work. The series was set to be even more extensive, with 4 more entries in the series being planned but never released. These included Game Maker, Graphical Message Maker, Sound Maker, and Video Jockey Maker. These games actually have some relatively unknown or unused data. A hidden video of the late president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, can be found within Talent Studio, where he stumbles over how to talk about what Talent Studio actually is. However, the most interesting secret not seen in the series can be found in Paint Studio, where the English developers clearly left unused text in the game's data unsavory by Nintendo's standards. Debug text pertaining to the game's initialization includes a fatal error message which reads, "Can't create N64DD manager. Expect things to f*** up." The Mario Artist games may have only been received by a small audience, but they undeniably inspired future work by Nintendo. Polygon Studios' Sound Bomber is the predecessor to the WarioWare series, including a number of microgames which would go on to be included in WarioWare, though with new names, graphics, and controls. In fact, the first level of the original WarioWare release, being played through a boombox, is a direct reference to the Sound Bomber mode. Talent Studio, on the other hand, would also serve as the inspiration for the cancelled GameCube title, Stage Debut. Shigeru Miyamoto claims that Stage Debut is actually the direct descendant of Talent Studio, and while it was never released, the work on Stage Debut served as the basis for Nintendo's Mii characters. Of course, ultimately, these games would never receive English localization, and the obvious reason for this is the series' requirement of using a 64DD add-on. As the 64DD never left Japan, neither did these artistic tools. Sales of Paint Studio also demonstrate the 64DD's troubles in Japan, and gives weight to its lack of localization, with its developer, Software Creations, estimating that it sold only 7,500 copies. With that said, Luigi Blood, a preserver of 64DD games, has translated the 3 games within the suite: Paint, Talent, and Polygon Studios. Going back to something slightly more traditional, Mario Golf is one branch of the franchise's sports spin-offs which gained a decent following, particularly considering the less than major interest that comes to golf titles in general. But one game in the series only saw release in Japan in May of 2001, Mobile Golf. This was a unique entry, not just in the Mario Golf series, but even on the Game Boy Color, being released alongside an adapter that gave players the opportunity to connect to the internet and play against others. The adapter would connect the Game Boy Color to a mobile phone, allowing games to connect to mobile phone networks to send and receive data. Similar to the other Mario Golf games, the player can pick one of 4 human characters to play through an RPG-style story, gaining experience and unlocking other characters as they progress through the game. Mario, Princess Peach, Yoshi, and Foreman Spike were all unlockable by connecting the game online as a sort of early form of DLC, though the service has of course ended since, and as such, they can no longer be accessed without hacking. Mobile Golf was in fact the last Game Boy Color game to be published on the Game Boy Color, which, alongside the inclusion of complicated networking features, likely contributed to it never being released outside of Japan. Nintendo were just most likely interested in focusing their efforts internationally on the Game Boy Advance. Our next game is Nintendo Puzzle Collection, which is a bit of a unique case. Released in Japan in 2003 for the GameCube, this is a collection of 3 games in one: Dr. Mario, Yoshi's Cookie, and Panel de Pon, better known in the US as Tetris Attack. Early versions of the collection were known as the Masterpiece Puzzle Collection, with a primary focus on creating a title that would appeal to women, with famed Japanese actress Asami Abe being brought in for televised advertising. Each game is based on an earlier release, with Dr. Mario being a port of Dr. Mario 64, Panel de Pon being based on an unreleased Nintendo 64 version of the game which got reworked and released in the US as Pokemon Puzzle League. Yoshi's Cookie, however, is an all-new game made specifically for this compilation, and never released in any form in the West. It even had a 4-player multiplayer mode where each player assumed the role of Mario, Yoshi, Peach, and Bowser. An interesting feature of this title is the ability for the player to connect their Game Boy Advance to the GameCube system through a link cable, allowing for a downloadable version of each title on the handheld, such as an emulated version of the original NES release of Dr. Mario. Despite the collection having been demoed at the usually US-centric E3 gaming convention, with a release having been slated for both North America and Europe, no such release was ever made. The game was even rated by the ESRB, so it was probably localized in full. So why was it canned? Nintendo published an unusually large amount of GameCube games in 2003, 11 in North America, 15 in Japan, and 9 in Europe. So maybe they were just overstretched and decided not to bring Puzzle Collection to the West. Or maybe it was just low sales. We'd love to say definitively, but Nintendo never shared sales figures for the game. It would be 2 more years before another Japanese exclusive Mario title was released in Yakuman DS, developed by Nintendo and their close partners, Intelligent Systems, famed for their work on the likes of WarioWare, Fire Emblem, and Paper Mario. You wouldn't be able to guess it from the game's box art, but yes, this is a Mario game. The title was released in spring 2005, exclusively in Japan, and is, loosely speaking, a sequel to the original Yakuman released on the Game Boy nearly 2 decades earlier. The game is simply a Riichi Mahjong game with Mario and his friends shoehorned in, allowing 4 players to go up against one another thanks to the DS's wireless connectivity. Despite being a regional exclusive, the game proved to be popular enough to earn a re-release a year later, this time taking advantage of the DS's Wi-Fi capabilities, allowing players to compete online. Mario would make an appearance in another DS title, this time developed by Square Enix as part of the Itadaki Street franchise, a series known for crossing different properties such as the more widely known follow-up game on the Wii, Fortune Street. Itadaki Street DS was released in 2007 and involves a Monopoly-style board where the player must purchase properties while playing a variety of minigames along the way to try and gain an advantage, similar to Mario Party. Not only does the game involve familiar faces from the Mario series, but also several characters from Dragon Quest. For the most part, the game matches closely with the Wii's Fortune Street release, but unlike the Wii game, this version stayed in Japan. Another Mario game without any presence in the US was actually a special reward to the Japanese Club Nintendo program, Club Nintendo Picross for the Nintendo 3DS. Released in 2012, the game was, as one might expect, a special release of Picross, focusing on various Nintendo franchises. The only way in which it could be downloaded was by redeeming the title with 80 Club Nintendo points, though it did also receive a release in South Korea, which could be earned by accessing the 3DS eShop throughout most of 2012, or as a reward with a purchase of New Super Mario Bros. 2 Gold Edition. This title received its own sequel just 2 years later, Club Nintendo Picross Plus, which included all of the same puzzles as the first title, with 100 additional stages added in, again only available through Club Nintendo. Since the discontinuation of the Nintendo 3DS, there hasn't been another Mario title released exclusively to Japan, and we think it's somewhat unlikely that many more Mario titles will ever have such a limited release. The practice of Nintendo only distributing their games to Japanese audiences is essentially a thing of the past. Did you know there's several games in the Legend of Zelda series which never saw a release in the United States? In some cases, the reasons for these games' lack of localization is quite apparent, while the lack of localization for some other titles is nothing short of baffling. Regardless of the reasons, all these games expand the Zelda universe in ways that many won't have known about. There's 6 games to cover across the Super Nintendo, GameCube, and even the Nintendo DS. But we're starting with 2 Japanese Zelda titles which released on Nintendo's SatellaView add-on, which were never re-released, and as a result, are only playable thanks to a dedicated fan community. The first of these titles we're exploring is BS Zelda no Densetsu, known in English simply as BS The Legend of Zelda. BS Zelda is a fully fledged remake of the original NES The Legend of Zelda from 1986. With BS Zelda being on the Super Nintendo, the game's graphics were recreated within 16-bit limitations. The game still plays very similarly to the original release, but with a few changes, both minor and major. A few examples are that the Super Nintendo's L and R buttons allow the player to switch between items on the fly, and the maximum number of rupees is increased from 255 to 999. Alterations were also made to the game's map, with the overworld actually being smaller, and the game's dungeon layouts being completely different. These changes have caused many fans to refer to the title as a third quest for The Legend of Zelda, as the original had a second quest that was unlocked after beating the game. As we mentioned earlier, this game was only playable on the SatellaView, and made use of a narrator to provide hints and tips at certain points of the livestream. This narrator is alleged to be the Old Man from the start of the game. 2 versions of BS Zelda were broadcast. Between August 9th and August 30th in 1995, the initial third quest version was streamed via SatellaView. However, in December of 1996, a version featuring a different world was broadcast. This is often referred to as the Map 2 version of the game, or the fourth quest. Due to the game being streamed to players, it had to be played in real time. As a result, events would occur at certain points during a broadcast, such as killing all enemies on screen or giving the player an unlimited quantity of a particular item. The game was streamed in 4 weekly installments, and players had to tune in at those times if they wanted to play. Another feature of the fourth quest is that players actually do not take control of Link. Instead, the title makes use of the SatellaView's mascots. These are a red-headed girl and a boy with a baseball cap. The player's name and gender were determined by the user's settings on the SatellaView and loaded into the game. This is the first time a Nintendo-developed Zelda game would feature a female protagonist. Prior to this release, the only Zelda games to have a playable female character were the CDI titles by Philips, and we all know how good they were. This playable character is known as the Hero of Light, a character that would be explored more in the next game we'll be looking at, BS The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets. Broadcast in 1997, BS The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets made use of the Super Nintendo's Link to the Past engine, once again putting the player in the shoes of the Hero of Light. A number of changes were made to the game's mechanics, such as being able to change direction while using the Pegasus boots. This change was possibly inspired by the ability to change direction while running in Marvelous, Another Treasure Island by A.G. Aonuma, but we'll be talking more about that game later. Ancient Stone Tablets is often seen as a sort of second quest for A Link to the Past, as many elements from A Link to the Past were reused and rearranged to create an original release. The only difference to most standard second quests within the Zelda series is that Ancient Stone Tablets actually features its own unique storyline. The game's story takes place 6 years after Link defeated Ganon in A Link to the Past. While the kingdom is at peace, Princess Zelda has a recurring dream of a shadow over a temple. When a mysterious light appears in the east of Hyrule, both Zelda and Sahasrarla's younger brother, Aghanar, go to investigate. They find a young child lying on the ground, and take the youth to Sahasrarla's hideout near the Eastern Palace, where Aghanar now resides. Because of the young hero's clothing, they believe that the child may not be from Hyrule at all. Zelda learns that Sahasrarla has left the land to seek out Link, who left after defeating Ganon years before. Sensing courage within the child, Zelda believes that they could be the Hero of Light. We won't go too in-depth with the game's plot for those wanting to play the game themselves. That said, the hero sets forth on a quest to retrieve Ancient Stone Tablets in order to learn more on the impending evil. At the start of the game, the player has no weapon. Instead, prior to obtaining a sword and shield from the Eastern Palace, a golden bee in a bottle can be used to protect the player. When let loose, the bee will attack any monsters the hero encounters, but will run from those who wield a blade. Also given to the player is a bug-catching net and an ocarina, which can be used to return to the entrance of a dungeon. The game is set up over a timeline of 4 real-world weeks. Each week, an hour-long broadcast would be made, similar to that of a serialized story. And every week, the player would have a total of about 50 minutes to complete 2 dungeons, as well as explore Hyrule in search of secrets and bonuses. After the time limit is over, the player's progress would be saved regardless of their position in the game. Progress would be carried over to each session, and players would keep any obtained tablets, items, and rupees. Rather than allow players to complete unfinished dungeons from the previous week, a thief stands at the entrance of the dungeon and would supply the hero with any treasures that they had found within said dungeon. The narrator from BS Zelda also makes a return in the game, but Aghanar and Princess Zelda will also speak to the player through telepathy. Their dialogue comes in the form of voice acting, and informs the player as well as advances the game's plot. The game also has timed events, which can change the weather to rain or fog, and introduce Zora enemies, as well as give players temporary powers. Some timed story events can also occur, such as the player having to save Zelda from Octoroks, or helping the Sanctuary Sage from drowning in a lake. The game was only ever broadcast twice, and was impossible to boot outside of the designated broadcast time, resulting in it being impossible to play without emulation. As the narration was broadcast to the player live and not stored locally, there's no way to emulate the game's voice acting and orchestral soundtrack without the original audio. While not considered part of the Zelda canon, Ancient Stone Tablets is the first time in which Zelda is shown predicting future events through her dreams. It also marks the first time in which Zelda's voice was ever heard. The game's plot also takes place 6 years after the events of A Link to the Past, the same period of time between the release of both games in Japan. Ancient Stone Tablets also mark the first time in which non-playable characters would move around the world and change behavior depending on the game's time, a feature used extensively in Majora's Mask. The term Hero of Light would also be featured in Four Swords Adventures, and is given to whoever is deemed most helpful during the multiplayer mode of Hyrulean Adventure. The BS Zelda titles are both impossible to play without the use of emulation. ROM files of the games can be found on the BS Zelda homepage, which was created in 1999 and is still maintained by Con. The site archives all releases of the games, as well as all patches that are available for the titles. These patches can range from changing sprites to be Link during gameplay, to attempting to recreate the full original broadcast quality of the titles. Of course, these games never saw a release in America, but they were also only available for a very limited time in Japan. In 1999, Nintendo broke its partnership with broadcaster Saint Giga, who controlled the service, and due to a dispute with the radio station, the service was terminated in the year 2000. The SatellaView, or some variant of it, may have been considered for the international market at some point. Regional variations of the Super Nintendo all had expansion ports used by the SatellaView on their underside, making it possible to utilize a similar device. However, there were no equivalent services to Saint Giga that operated outside of Japan. This would have made it difficult to get a similar service working in the West. Audio or radio dramas are also extremely popular in Japan, meaning the streams were tailored for a Japanese audience. In fact, many games feature audio drama adaptations. Along with the cultural differences, the need to find voice actors for English releases would have been costly, making the investment of localizing the games an even bigger risk. Before we get to the Zelda title we're most eager to talk about, we'd be doing this video a disservice if we didn't bring up a collection of DS Zelda games that never came to America. Tingle, a bizarre little guy who first appeared in Majora's Mask, divided audiences with his strange characteristics. That, however, didn't stop him having a number of games specifically following his exploits. His first solo adventure didn't come in a particularly unique form, nor as a massive release, being a game that was only made available as a reward from Club Nintendo in Japan. Released in 2007, Tingle's Balloon Fight DS was a remake of the original Balloon Fight for the NES, with Tingle taking the role of the main playable character. The game featured 3 modes labeled A, B, and C, with Mode A being a recreation of the original Balloon Fights arcade format, 99 stages which loop upon completion. Mode B was a multiplayer mode which made use of the DS Download Play feature so that multiple people could play through just a single cartridge, providing a fairly simple competitive balloon fight for up to 4 players. Mode C is simply Balloon Trip, which sets Tingle across a set of side-scrolling stages as he navigates around various obstacles whilst attempting to collect rupees along the way. This was most likely created as a means of promoting another Tingle title that had been released shortly before, freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land. Released on Nintendo DS in Japan in 2006 and Europe in 2007, and developed by Vanpool, the game follows Tingle and his transformation from an average Joe middle-aged man into a green-garbed fairy. In the game, Tingle starts to hear voices which guide him to a spring nearby his house, where he meets Uncle Rupee. Uncle Rupee is an older-looking man with a giant rupee for a head, who offers Tingle the chance to live out his days in a paradise known as Rupee Land, so long as he continues to throw rupees into the pool. With more and more rupees being offered to Uncle Rupee, a tower from beneath the water will begin to rise toward the sky, allowing Tingle to enter Rupee Land. By accepting Uncle Rupee's offer, he is changed, with rupees becoming his sole source of life. The game's events take place across 3 continents with a total of 11 differently themed islands, each containing a dungeon or puzzle that must be solved. The main goal of the game is to make the tower in the spring reach Rupee Land, with the gameplay centering around collecting as much money as possible. On top of this, the player must barter with a variety of NPCs to obtain both information and items, costing what the player must deem to be a reasonable price. Paying too little will provide the player with nothing, but paying too much will needlessly inflate how much they need to let go. This is likely the most bizarre element to the game, with so many people asking you to determine what is believed to be a fair price in certain scenarios. Defeating bosses and completing dungeons not only provides substantial rupee payouts, but also rewards the player with 1 of 5 gemstones, with all 5 needing to be obtained to complete the game. As the tower grows, more areas are unlocked at certain heights, leading to a continual need to donate money in order to progress. Items can also be obtained and sold on Tingle's adventure, or they can be used to aid other characters. Items can sometimes be combined to create new variations in a boiling pot at Tingle's house. There's also decorative items that can be used to adorn the top floor of Tingle's home. While exploring, the DS's top screen acts as a map, but maps must first be discovered, and even then, they are not complete. The game has the player circle landmarks on their maps, encouraging the player to explore all of a map's area. Once completed, the player can of course keep hold of their map, or they can sell it to the map maker for rupees, meaning that the player will no longer have a map for certain areas should they return to them. Seeing as Tingle is very much not a fighter, combat is peculiar in this game. Tingle initiates battles by walking into enemies, creating a large dust cloud. By tapping on the cloud with the stylus, Tingle beats his opponents more quickly. But it's also possible to move during combat to add more enemies into the mix. By increasing the number of enemies in a battle, rewards are increased exponentially, but it also increases how quickly Tingle is hurt. As Tingle's life force is directly attached to his rupees, damage simply depletes the player's rupee count the longer a battle goes on for. To assist in combat and puzzles throughout the game, Tingle can hire several supporting characters into his party in the form of bodyguards. Bodyguards all have varying stats and uses, and not only assist in combat, but are necessary to solve certain puzzles throughout the game. These characters are controlled by dragging them with the stylus, while Tingle is controlled with the system's buttons. Tingle is also aided by another fairy in his quest, known as Pinkle, who provides hints and tips along the adventure. Though not necessarily accepted as canon within the Zelda universe, Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land explains a fair amount about who Tingle is in the world of Hyrule. Tingle is actually not a person specifically, but rather a state of being, capable of falling upon any living thing. The game requires you to name your character, not allowing the name Tingle to be used at all. The name Tingle is still used, however, being adopted by the player after they are transformed. Whoever becomes Tingle will automatically don the green and red suit associated with the character, and become dependent on rupees to survive. Without rupees, Tingle will die. The game also suggests that, like Link, the person who becomes Tingle is bound to the role by destiny. Interestingly, it seems Uncle Rupee may have gotten his name as a result of a bad translation. In the original Japanese version of the game, he is known as Old Man, or Grandpa Rupee, suiting his appearance. It's possible that the translator didn't notice a single character of his name, which changes the word from Old Man to Uncle. The game also includes a wide number of references, such as the boss fight with Captain Stalfos having a top screen similar to that of Nintendo's Punch-Out cabinets in arcades. Even the game's combat system is similar to an earlier Nintendo game, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, another title that we've covered on this channel before. Making this even more interesting, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls was actually a game which had its engine adapted for an earlier entry into the Legend of Zelda series, Link's Awakening. This means that Rosy Rupee Land pays homage to the predecessor to an earlier portable Zelda title. We'll talk more on the game's localization and release after we explore the next Tingle adventure game on the DS, Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love. Irozuki Tingle no Koi no Balloon Trip, or Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love, was released exclusively in Japan in 2009. Unlike Rosy Rupee Land, where the game centers around money, Balloon Trip of Love is all about women. Just like in the previous title, the game begins with the player taking on the role of a regular 35-year-old man. Whilst watching telesales on his TV, he learns of a book known as Ripened Valiant Heroes Balloon Trip of Love, a novel following the story of a hero who leaves his parents to fall in love with a princess. He purchases the book at the discounted price of just 2 rupees. However, when he finally opens the book, he's sucked inside and transformed into Tingle. His goal, and only means of escaping the book, is to have a dance with the princess of the book's world, the primary goal of the title. While in this mysterious world, Tingle becomes acquainted with 3 characters reminiscent of those found in The Wizard of Oz. Kakashi, a friendly scarecrow, Biruki, a surly robot, and Lion, the cowardly, lion. Each serves different gameplay roles, with Kakashi capable of fitting into small spaces and using straw to prod at things, Biruki being able to kick objects or analyze them using her robot skills, and Lion being a coward though immensely strong, who has a good rapport with animals. With their help, Tingle must solve puzzles to progress, making his way to the city where Tingle & Co. can all have their wishes granted to them. An additional and central gameplay element of the title is romancing various women. Tingle must form relationships with girls throughout his journey, gaining their affections by showering them with gifts, with each one having their own specific tastes. These gifts can both be purchased or found throughout the game. Unlike the previous entry in the series, Balloon Trip of Love plays more closely to a point-and-click adventure game, with the gameplay being almost exclusively played with the stylus. The player must simply tap objects on screen to interact with them, solving various puzzles and making use of their inventory to further the story. Similar to Rosy Rupee Land, the game makes several references to other Nintendo series. During page 4 of the book, an expired bottle of juice can be found in a spooky abandoned house. If Tingle chooses to drink it, he will have a sudden upset stomach, running from the house to the invincibility theme from Super Mario. On page 6, a minigame can be played which pays homage to Super Mario Bros. 2, including a character select menu of the same style in which the player must pick vegetables and worms from a field. The character of Lovia, who teaches Tingle how to win the affections of women as well as sell him various gifts, is dressed as an angel, similar to that of Nintendo's Pit. His theme tune is also somewhat reminiscent of Pit's as well. At the end of a dungeon minigame, a victory dance is displayed which has Tingle appear as he does in Majora's Mask, and it's really bloody creepy. The robot crew who operate the Orbital Industries shipping center are almost exactly the same in appearance to that of Chibi Robo. There are also many more throughout Tingle's adventure, so we shan't name them all. while the first iteration of the Tingle-centric games did receive a release in Europe, the second did not. And to top it off, neither titles made their way to an American audience at all. The reasoning behind this has never been officially stated by Nintendo, though fan speculation is that the sexualized themes of Tingle could have lent themselves to caution on Nintendo's part. It's also no secret that Tingle has often received a negative response by American audiences, even being acknowledged by Zelda director Eiji Aonuma himself. After all, this is the reason that Tingle never appears in Twilight Princess, though many would argue that the negativity surrounding the character is mostly in jest, and in some ways, it plays into the character's role within the Zelda series. With that said, Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land had an official poll on Nintendo's website, asking players whether the title should be released to American audiences, with the results swinging, arguably surprisingly, against a release. The fact that Nintendo felt the need to create the poll could be seen as an attempt to gauge a real response on people's feelings towards the character, and the idea of a game centered entirely around him, asking players if they thought he was interesting enough, whether he was considered funny, interesting, boring, or annoying, and even how people would react if he appeared in the then upcoming mainline Zelda game, Twilight Princess. Seeing as Balloon Trip of Love has even more of a sexualized central theme, primarily involving Tingle flirting with women in order to gain their affection, it's unsurprising that Nintendo were reluctant to consider a translation and localization overseas. This second title didn't even see a release in Europe, despite the first entry making its way to the continent, though this could also suggest that Rosy Rupee Land was released in Europe as translation work had already been underway, with the expectation that the game would be released in the US. As audiences had voted against the release in the US, the English translation could still be put to at least some use by launching the game within PAL territories. A fan translation for Balloon Trip of Love was completed in 2017, however, created by several people collectively known as Team Tingle. In 2010, Vanpool, developers of both games, were developing an additional full Tingle title, though the concept was dropped. The game would have been a horror title starring Tingle in the main role, though it was cancelled due to, and I quote, a variety of reasons. However, it could be argued that a horror game with Tingle would be something that would have likely resonated with an American audience more than the slightly creepy perverted elf man going on wacky adventures to become rich and woo unsuspecting women by showering them with money and gifts. It's not quite fitting with Western values in this day and age. And now for another unique Zelda game that never came to the West. A GameCube Zelda game within a game. While not a fully fledged game in its own right, 2004's The Legend of Zelda Four Swords Adventures had an entire additional mode exclusive to the Japanese and Korean releases called Navi Trackers. Similar to the main part of Four Swords Adventures, Navi Trackers utilizes the Game Boy Advance to GameCube link cable to give each of the 4 possible players their own screen to play from, whilst the television is used as a map and shared screen. This screen also shows Tetra and a number of other characters from Wind Waker, who provide the player with fully voiced commentary while they play. This is interesting in its own right, as outside of the SatellaView titles, Zelda games didn't typically feature much in the way of voice acting. With this in mind, players can select their gender, along with 2 Japanese characters as their name, which are read aloud by Tetra in Japanese, which is also the case in the Korean release as well. Taking place after the events of the Wind Waker, players must compete across large mazes to navigate and locate the members of Tetra's pirate crew, whilst picking up stamps or medals along the way, to prove Link's worth as a member of the band of pirates, with the 3 opposing players being other pirates who have disguised themselves as Link. The mechanics weren't actually unique to this game, and appeared in an earlier Japanese exclusive title by Eiji Aonuma, Marvelous Another Treasure Island. The mechanics in question weren't part of the fully fledged release of Marvelous, but rather a SatellaView broadcast in which players would listen to the radio broadcast while navigating a map to collect stamps. This is known as a stamp rally, a common event for Japanese people outside of gaming, in which they collect stamps during events or when visiting locations across the country. Essentially, Navi Trackers replaces the radio broadcast with Tetra's narration. Not only does this mode play as a 4-player competition, but there's also a single-player experience which pits the player against an AI-controlled Tingle instead. The name Navi trackers worked as both a reference to Link's companion Navi, but also to demonstrate the primary challenge of navigation. That said, the game was once planned to be called Tetris Trackers when it was announced for the West and first shown at E3 in 2003, alongside Four Swords Adventures. Both games were previewed as separate titles, though later that year it was announced that both games, alongside an additional mode called Shadow Battle, would come bundled together on the same disc as a 3-in-1 package. The common thread between these games is that all of them would use GBA to GameCube connectivity. However, when the game was launched outside of Japan and Korea, only the main Hyrulean Adventure and Shadow Battle were included. This confused many as Navi Trackers was originally demonstrated in English, with players choosing an English initial to represent their name in place of 2 Japanese characters. There isn't a lot of information available as to why this game was only released in Japan and Korea, but Nintendo had a tendency to steer away from voice acting in their major franchises, with many finding issue with the extensive voice acting featured in Super Mario Sunshine. Reprogramming many aspects of the game to work with English could have been a challenge in this respect. We've mentioned some similarities between Navi Trackers and Marvelous Another Treasure Island, but it seems the connection between these two games may run even deeper than loose inspiration. Marvelous was created after Eiji Aonuma expressed an interest in creating a Zelda game. Keep in mind, this was before Aonuma ever worked on a Zelda title, and is why Marvelous gives off some strong Zelda vibes. But now that Aonuma is the de facto Zelda series producer, he may have gotten the urge to go back to the world of Marvelous. In a Nintendo Online magazine interview published in March 2004, Navi Trackers director Yoshinori Tsuchiyama said the game originated from the desire to make a complete departure from Hyrulean Adventure, which is the main game in Four Swords Adventures, and incorporate a sense of realism produced by having the game talk to the players through the screen. Aonuma then chimes in, saying, "It all started with an 8-year-old game called Marvelous, which made use of the SatellaView satellite transmission system. In that game, players would collect stamps while listening to a radio broadcast. We replaced the satellite transmission system with the connectivity function, used Tetra's character as the vocal guide, and incorporated the pirates." So Navi Trackers was meant to be a complete departure from the main game in Four Swords, and upon hearing this, Aonuma starts talking about Marvelous. It'd be easy to think nothing of this, but there's unused assets in the game's data that make this brief exchange very interesting. Within this unused material are various player icons for a blonde-haired boy in a cowboy hat, a character known as Dion, who was one of the 3 main protagonists in Marvelous. There's 4 different colors for Dion, each for a player character, just like the 4 different colors for Link in the final game. There's even data suggesting that the character Gina Rockwell, who is Dion's teacher in Marvelous, originally took the place of Tetra in Navi Trackers. There's an unused background image showing Gina talking to the player, taking up the same part of the screen Tetra does in the finished game. Biggest of all, there's even a full 3D model of Gina which seems fairly polished. Putting all of this together, it seems that Navi Trackers was originally planned to be based on the Marvelous IP, with Gina guiding Dion instead of Tetra guiding Link. But it was reworked into something that would be more marketable, which is ironic considering that this game mode is probably one of the least played Zelda games of all time.
Did you know there's actually several Japan-exclusive Pokemon games on one of Nintendo's most beloved handhelds, the Game Boy Advance? Nintendo created several mini-games based on the Pokemon series for the GBA, but these weren't part of a standard retail release. They were distributed through the Pokemon trading card game. Special edition cards were released for the TCG that could be scanned into the Nintendo e-card reader. This was a device for the Game Boy Advance that could read encoded strips of data, similar to a magnetic strip reader on a credit card machine, which could scan a line of code from cards and then send that data to the GBA. Some of these cards would hold additional content for full retail titles, but in the case of Pokemon, some cards were released that held their own exclusive, fully fledged mini-games. We say fully fledged, but they weren't exactly going to stun the audiences with their incredible gameplay, though we wouldn't call them a waste of time either. A fair amount of these cards were released internationally, but Japan had a collection of promotional cards which never had any publication outside of the region. These include Exciting Hide and Seek. This one's less of a game and more of a simple animated cartoon, likely based on the animated short Pikachu's Peekaboo, known in Japan as Pikachu's Exciting Hide and Seek. There are two different possible versions of this animated skit involving Pikachu and Larvitar hiding from one another. Next is Imakuni's Ball. Based on the Ball Game & Watch title, it involves juggling balls by using the left and right buttons, though in this instance, the player's character is replaced by Tomoaki Imakuni, a Japanese musician who performed several songs for the Pokemon anime, and promotional material for the TCG. He was even featured on several Pokemon cards, including the card required to play this game. There's also Wooper's Juggling Game. Taking on the role of Wooper, the objective here is to use the Wooper's water gun attack to keep Poliwag and Totodile off the ground. After a short while, Psyduck then gets dropped into the mix, with Poliwag falling faster than Totodile, and Psyduck taking 2 blasts before being projected higher. Then there's Big Fruit Strategy. Here, the player controls Totodile as the Mon swims in the water, with the goal of collecting as much fruit as possible while avoiding a number of Tentacruel. The player then obtains different point values depending on which fruit is collected, and the game finishes once the player crosses the finish line of the course. And last but not least, there's Toko Toko Truck. This game has 2 Pichus riding a handcar while passing different train stations. Their final destination is the Pokemon Center in Tokyo, but they have to get there before the time runs out by jumping over boulders left on the track along the way. There are plenty more Pokemon games exclusive to Japan which we'll be covering in this video. As usual, we'll be extensive, but we won't be counting demos or games that later got a comprehensive release in other regions, such as Pokémonster Stadium or Great Detective Pikachu Birth of a New Duo, or even Pokemon Green, as the original Green and Red were basically just less polished versions of what we got in the West. We also won't be counting apps that have no game-like elements, like Pokemon PC Master, which essentially just taught kids how to use a PC. We'll also have one pretty unique game we want to talk about at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. Now, we try not to be biased on this channel, but the next game we're talking about is definitely our favourite game in this video. The Pokemon trading card game on the Game Boy was a huge change to the original games. Developed by Hudson, these games translated the mechanics of the Pokemon trading card game into a video game format. The game received an international release to wide acclaim, so it was surprising to learn that the game's sequel remains exclusive to Japan even to this day. Also by Hudson, Pokemon Card GB2 Here Comes Team GR boasted several new features and improvements over its predecessor. An optional choice of the player's gender was added, a training mode was included to teach people how to actually play the game well, and a deck diagnosis system was introduced to rate the player's crafted deck. Compared to the first game, which had 228 cards, GB2 was bumped up to a total of 445 cards. Probably the most iconic card added to GB2 was Great Rocket's Mewtwo, which was featured prominently in the game, and a real-life version of the card was distributed in Japan, bundled with special edition Celebi-themed Game Boy Advances, which means GR Mewtwo was Japan exclusive both physically and digitally. Here's a translation of the card text. As you can see, its abilities essentially make it the captain of all dark Pokemon. It wasn't just the card count that was increased, but the size of the entire game was increased massively. Rather than a simple collect all the badges plot, a rival team was introduced known as Team Great Rocket, led by King Bidorichi. This group kidnaps the club masters from around the island featured in the original release, and steals everyone's cards. So the player assumes the role of a hero that sets off to rescue the masters and restore the status quo. Similarly to how Pokemon Gold and Silver introduced the second island, TCG GB2 is also made up of 2 different islands. The island featured in the first game, and a second island called GR Island. This was partly to address a common complaint with the first game, its rather short playtime. The game's graphics were also noticeably improved, with areas having much more deep theming, characters having more animations, and a new selection of coins for the player to use during the match's initial coin toss. Another introduction to the card game sequel was a game center, where the player is able to play a variety of minigames similar to that of the main series. This may be our bias speaking as fans of the Pokemon TCG game on the Game Boy, but this title is actually very enjoyable as a sequel, holding up even today. But this begs the question as to why it never saw an English release, and sadly, this isn't a hard question to answer. Pokemon Card GB2 released at the late date of March 28, 2001. This was just a week after the release of the Game Boy Advance, and with the original Pokemon TCG Game Boy release taking years to be localized outside of Japan, if this title was localized into English, it probably would have been released in 2002 or perhaps even 2003, meaning this sequel would have been in direct competition with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. And with GB2 essentially being twice the size of the original game, it would have been more prudent for Nintendo to put those localization resources towards a GBA game instead. Lucky for the Pokemon franchise, the collectible creatures managed to become such a strong brand that they didn't have to be constrained to one genre, or even popular genres. The world of sport saw its own Pokemon game with extremely limited availability. Pokepark Fishing Rally DS was available for just a few months in 2005, and could only be obtained through the DS Download Play kiosk. These kiosks could originally be found in Pokepark, a theme park dedicated to the franchise, though they would later be placed in Japanese Pokemon Center stores and at Pokemon Festa, an annual Pokemon convention. The title's gameplay takes place on a river flowing into the sea, with the area changing over time. The top screen would display the shadows of different Pokemon underwater, and the player must cast their line onto the screen, pressing the A button when the floater is pulled under, and then repeatedly tapping to pull the catch. Each Pokemon caught is displayed on the touchscreen, with their different scores being shown on the top screen based on the size of the Pokemon, level, and rarity. Scores would be tallied at the end of play, with the top 50 scores being sent back to the kiosk and placed upon a score list shown on screen. Not only is the game limited in its release, only being available via a region-specific kiosk, but there was also no means of actually storing the game, meaning that should the player's DS be shut down, it could no longer be played. While one could, in theory, keep their DS powered up and the game left running at all times, it would still be unavailable long term, as the game was also restricted to a 12-hour time limit. Partly due to its limited distribution and semi-permanent state, the title has now become lost media, with the only known ROM being held by a private collector who refuses to make the ROM public, despite constant requests from the community. Although he did, at the very least, record himself playing the game to give us a better look at how it functioned. Moving away from the card games and fishing spin-offs to special hardware. The Pokemon Mini was a dedicated handheld made just to house a collection of games relating to Pokemon. While the system was released worldwide, not all games received localization, with some titles being restricted to just Japan. A total of 10 cartridges were published for the system, with only 4 getting released in the US, while there are 5 exclusive to Japan, and an additional game which released both in Japan and Europe, Pokemon Tetris. As is likely an obvious statement, this would be a crossover with the classic Tetris gameplay, with Pokemon elements strewn in. While every other game for the Mini was developed by Japanese studios Jupiter and Denusha, Pokemon Tetris is the one game in the Mini's library to be actually developed by Nintendo themselves. As an aside, it's also the last game where Jinx is depicted with the original skin coloring. This version of Tetris is regarded as one of the best games released for the Mini and has a high asking price on the pre-owned market. The European release is especially elusive, with only a few thousand copies ever being printed. Plans were clearly made to release the title in the US as well, with it having received an ESRB classification under the title Pokemon Mini Shock Tetris. The other Japan exclusive titles include a platform racer hybrid called Pokemon Race Mini and an adventure game called Togepi's Great Adventure, a sequel to Pokemon Puzzle Mini which featured 80 new puzzles, and a follow-up to Party Mini featuring the Pichu Bros, characters that made their debut in the anime short Pikachu and Pichu, shown alongside the third Pokemon movie. The last game released for the Mini was Pokemon Breeder Mini in December 2002, a virtual pet style game similar to that of a Tamagotchi. The Mini was released during the second generation of Pokemon, with Gold and Silver having been released a year prior in North America, With Breeder Mini in particular, the system briefly overlapped into the third generation, as it featured the starter Pokemon from Ruby and Sapphire, with those two titles releasing in Japan a month prior. There's evidence showing a couple of these mini titles were even considered for wider release, but it's likely these plans were hampered due to the system's low sales. The Pokemon Mini has largely been forgotten and is generally considered one of Nintendo's hardware failures. But some of Japan's Pokemon exclusives were on popular hardware. Very popular hardware. The region received 3 versions of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon created exclusively for the Nintendo Wii, made available as WiiWare downloads on the Nintendo Shop channel in late 2009 for 1,200 Wii points, or about $12 each. These titles were Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Keep Going Blazing Adventure Squad, Let's Go Stormy Adventure Squad, and Go For It Light Adventure Squad. Developed by Chunsoft, these entries mark the only time that Mystery Dungeon has appeared on a home console. They're also the only entries in the sub-series not to receive an international release. Often referred to as the Adventure Squad series, and contrary to other Mystery Dungeon games, these 3 titles put little emphasis on storyline. The game's plot starts with a group of Pokemon being sent by Slowking to rescue a lost Shuckle. After returning to town, he explains that he was searching for some delicious food, a story that will continue to unfold as progress is made. This then opens up the game's bulletin board, where Pokemon post requests for the player to undertake in exchange for a reward. Depending on which of the 3 iterations of the game is being played, the hub world will differ. For Blazing Squad, the location is a Pokemon village near a volcano. In Stormy Squad, the player is based at Pokemon Beach, and for Light Squad, the hub is a Pokemon Garden, which is held within a forest. The games made use of the same 3D graphics featured in My Pokemon Ranch, another WiiWare release which simplified the graphical style of each Pokemon. And according to IGN, the game's developers were aiming for something which resembles a picture book. Additional missions can be added to the game through the Wii's Wii Connect 24 feature, which will download while the Wii is in sleep mode. For a short period after the game released, several promotional codes were distributed as well, which could be entered through the game's Wonder Mail menu. These codes could be used to unlock unique Pokemon who the player could then use throughout the dungeons. These titles never saw a release outside of Japan, but this doesn't mean that they were never intended to be translated. Copyright filings were made in the US for each game's title, not just with their direct translations, but also a second set of filings for reimagined subtitles, which put the elements at the end of their names. The names were Forward Adventurers of Flame, Let's Go Adventurers of Storm, and Aspire Adventurers of Light. During development, IGN reported on the games multiple times assuming that they'd receive international localization, but this never came to fruition. To many, the lack of a stateside release was surprising, seeing as the Pokemon franchise has always had a strong following in the West. The Wii had a massive install base in 2009 and 2010, so why the game never surfaced in the West remains a bit of a mystery. In a positive turn of events though, a team of people at Project Pokemon released translation patches for all 3 games, making them playable in English over a decade after their original release. These translation patches not only aim to localize the game in a similar manner to that of previous official English releases, but also brought back almost all of the online features, including downloadable event missions and legendaries. Moving on from Pokemon games on popular hardware to Pokemon games on a console which some people have never heard of. The Sega Pico saw an exceptionally limited release worldwide, but was particularly popular with Japanese schoolchildren. Despite their association with Nintendo, the owners of the Pokemon brand, the Pokemon Company, aren't exclusively controlled by Nintendo. They have the option to create products branching across multiple video game platforms, which allows the series to reach a wider audience than just those interested in Nintendo hardware. Before we explain the Pico's Pokemon games, we should first give a brief introduction of what on earth the Sega Pico even is and where it came from. The Pico was released in Japan in 1993 and saw an international release a year later in 1994. The system held some mild success for a number of years, though it was ultimately discontinued outside of Japan in 1998. In Japan, however, the system would see continued support until as late as 2005. As of April 2005, 3.4 million Pico consoles had been sold at retail, with over 11 million software sales across 300 different pieces of software. The Pico hardware was derived from that of the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, though differed dramatically in control and function. The Pico is shaped somewhat like a laptop, but without a screen or full keyboard, instead having a pad controlled by a quote magic pen, as well as some coloured directional buttons. Cartridges for the console aren't actually cartridges in the traditional sense either, referred to as storyware. Each game comes in the form of a picture book with a slot on the bottom which connects to the top half of the system, with the game progressing as each page of the book is turned. While the system saw a limited international release, none of the Pokemon titles made for the system were ever localized in the West. One of these region-locked titles was Pokemon Catch the Numbers, which released July 23, 2002, and featured the second generation of Pokemon. It was designed to teach children numeracy skills, with the story following Pikachu and Togepi after Team Rocket steals all of Ash, Misty, and Brock's other Pokemon. The player is faced with a selection of minigames that must be completed in order to retrieve the lost companions. As a side note, within the data of Catch the Numbers, a sprite of a Weezing can be found, which would ultimately never be used in-game. Another title is Pokemon Advanced Generation I've Begun Hiragana and Katakana, which released November 17, 2003 and used the third generation of Pokemon. It was designed to teach Japanese children how to read and write Hiragana and Katakana script. The story again involves Team Rocket, with them deceiving Ash, Brock, May and Max by disguising themselves and telling them that they need 25 Pokemon to progress to the Pokemon stage. Each Pokemon is caught by correctly drawing 5 Kana. If Pokemon on a Sega console wasn't enough, the Pikachu Pico was a Pikachu branded Pico released in 2004, a year before the end of the Pico's life cycle. This system had no technical differences to a standard Pico console, and of course was made solely as a way of boosting the system's sales. The console came bundled with a copy of Pokemon Advanced Generation I've Begun Hiragana and Katakana, and the last game published on the standard Pico was Pokemon Advanced Generation Pico for Everyone Pokemon Loud Battle, released on July 13th, 2004. The game again includes the third generation of Pokemon. The game stars Ash, Brock, May and Team Rocket, and the game is mainly based around reading and playing minigames. The title came with a Pikachu-themed controller featuring various minigames that were playable in a competitive 2-player mode, with both players using either side of the controller. Inevitably, the Sega Pico would come to the end of its life cycle in 2005, but the Pico brand wouldn't be entirely scrapped. Instead, a new and improved follow-up to the console was created for the Japanese market. This successor, the Advanced Pico Beaner, was released in 2005 and is often referred to as simply the Beaner. The two systems were very similar in design, though the Beaner features an additional set of buttons on its right side to accommodate left-handed children, as well as built-in speakers and new ports for add-ons, such as an SD card reader, which can be used to save game progress and store images. And of course, the Beaner got more Pokemon titles. Pokemon Advanced Generation Pokemon Number Battle, released on October 1st in 2005, the game uses the third generation of Pokemon. The game mostly involves finding hidden Pokemon in various scenes, as well as solving math questions and puzzles. After this, intellectual training drill Pokemon Diamond and Pearl Letter and Number Intelligence game was released on the 21st of April 2007 and featured the fourth generation of Pokemon. The game was geared towards teaching children general knowledge, words and numbers, asking them to do tasks such as counting Pokemon and grouping them together based on on-screen prompts. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl Search for Pokemon Adventure in the Maze was released on September 17th, 2009, again using the 4th generation Pokemon. This title seems to focus more on the Pokemon brand itself, with the player having to use the book to highlight Pokemon either based on their silhouettes or finding them in on-screen mazes. The game also encourages children to learn the Pokemon by name alone rather than relying entirely on images. And lastly, Pokemon Best Wishes Intelligence Training Pokemon Big Sports Meet was released on December 4th, 2010 and included Generation 5 Pokemon. The player takes on the role of Ash through various games which involve learning Hiragana, numbers and English, as well as completing a number of exercises in order to win medals. Through the use of the Beaner SD card reader, sold separately, it is possible to save and print images created in-game. Our next game that never left the land of the rising sun was also educational, well, sort of. After the success of the first generation titles, Pokemon had solidified itself as a huge player in gaming. Nintendo naturally wanted to capitalize on the series' fame and ejected Pokemon into its new series of Picross titles, the Picross NP series. The series was exclusively available via download using the Nintendo Power Service in 1999 in Japan. The service allowed players to store a game on a blank Super Famicom cartridge using the in-store kiosk and take it home with them. Picross NP Volume 1, the first in the series, kicked things off by putting Pokemon front and center. In total, the game features 12 different Pokemon-based puzzles, one each for Meowth, Mr. Mime, Psyduck, the Clefairy Doll, Togepi, Electrode, Gloom, Pikachu, Zapdos, Rapidash, Poliwag, and Snorlax. Since the Picross NP series was made exclusively for the Nintendo Power Service, and the service never left Japan, it's safe to bet that this is why the series never came to the West. You could argue that Nintendo could have just slapped all 8 Picross NP titles on a cartridge in English for a quick buck, but 1995's Mario Picross was a flop in both US and Europe. This would make an English localization of Picross NP a risky move, one that probably wasn't worth it. Remember that awesome trading card game we talked about earlier? Well, there were a couple more trading card games that stayed with Japanese audiences exclusively, though they lacked a fully fledged adventure mode like Pokemon Card GB2. One of these TCG titles was a Japanese exclusive browser game called Pokemon Card Game Online, which released in 2009. Be sure not to mistake this game for a similarly titled Pokemon Trading Card Game Online, which is entirely different. Built in Flash, this massively multiplayer online card game is simply a means of playing the physical card game with others across the internet, utilizing unique access codes included with Leafeon vs Metagross Expert Deck CD-ROMs. For users with a Pokemon Daisuke Club account, signing up for the service also deposited 2,000 action points, the in-game currency, into their account for use via the club's action point system. This game would allow players to use fixed decks against players made up of cards included in their pack purchase. The service only ran for about a year before being discontinued. A few years later, the West would get the aforementioned Pokemon Trading Card Game Online, making a localization of this original title redundant. Yet another card game entry was Pokemon card game How to Play DS in 2011, which served, unsurprisingly, as a means of teaching the player the rules of the card game, but on Nintendo DS. The game includes a digital rulebook covering how to play, along with a variety of tutorials. Once completed, 5 CPU-controlled opponents will become available to practice with. The game boasted a pretty neat feature, however, making use of the DS download play function, allowing 2 players to compete against one another with only 1 cartridge. The title even came packaged with 90 real Pokemon cards so that you could take that sweet TCG knowledge you just learned out into the real world with you. Though Pokemon is at home on handhelds, many in the West didn't realize that the Pokemon franchise actually had moved to the mobile market earlier than the launch of smartphone. Not only that, but the first mobile application for the series wasn't even created by Nintendo, but rather Square Enix. Released in 2006, Pokemate was a phone application that let players send and receive messages with friends or participate in live chat, but also catch and store Pokemon. When starting the game, the player is given a random Pokemon along with 10 Pokeballs to capture more. Rather than utilizing mechanics of fighting or leveling, instead, the game serves as a virtual pet simulator, with the player caring for their caught Pokemon, just like a Tamagotchi. Players were encouraged to sign up for the game's subscription service, which would grant them additional Pokeballs, extra media features, and the ability to catch more than just 3 Pokemon. While only released in Japan, the game was demonstrated in the US during E3 2006, with many assuming the worldwide launch would be coming at some point. As the result of low interaction from users, the service was discontinued in 2008. Around the time, it would have been unlikely to see an international release. The game can no longer be accessed, and all that remains are a limited number of videos and screenshots, making this another piece of Pokemon lost media. Pokemon's return to the mobile market came with the launch of smartphones. In 2011, Pokemon Say Tap became the second Pokemon mobile game after Pokemate, and is even more limited in scope. Developed by Creatures Inc., the application is a rhythm game based on the trading card game, with the goal revolving around tapping cards displayed on screen in time to the music and icons as they pass a circle. More points are awarded according to accuracy for the player's timing. This simple feat becomes less impressive after finding out there is only a single song available to play, and it's the ending theme to the Japanese anime at the time of its release. Can you name all the Pokemon, BW? In a similar vein, just a few years later in 2015, Dancing Pokemon Band took the concept a step further. The player takes control of a Pokemon summoned by Hooper and must tap 3 different icons, donning different Pokemon faces as musical notes pass over them, with more points being awarded for better timing. Each correctly timed tap fills a meter at the top of the screen, which, when maxed out, causes 2 additional Pokemon to jump on screen for a 10-second dancing round, where buttons can be tapped freely before the song finishes. After the game ends, the player is given a rank and a Pecha Berry worth different amounts depending on score. These can then be spent to unlock additional Pokemon to play across the game's selection of 4 songs and 3 stages. There are also 3 additional Pokemon that could be unlocked by entering special passwords revealed across Pokemon shows on TV. Pokemon Say Tap and Pokemon Dancing Pokemon Band were only made available for a few months in 2011 and 2015 respectively, and as such were never brought to the West. One could assume that around the mid-2010s, limited releases of internationally renowned series would become an outdated practice, but that simply wasn't the case for Pokemon. The series continued to see more games that never got localization, despite the clear appetite for their availability among fans. A free downloadable Pokemon game limited to Japan was released for the 3DS in 2014, developed by Marvelous, called The Thieves and the Thousand Pokemon. The game's plot revolves around recovering stolen diamonds, supplementing the plot of the 17th Pokemon movie, Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction. Essentially, a group of thieves has been using their Pokemon to steal valuable diamonds from the Diamond Domain, where they are used as a form of energy. The player takes control of a squad of Chespin, Fennekin and Froakie, with one designated as their leader, to recover the stolen artifacts and return them to their rightful place. Players are initially given 50 of whichever starter Pokemon they choose, which can then be taken into a stage as a spendable resource, with additional Pokemon being obtained through Street Pass, or by spending the Nintendo 3DS's Play Coins. The Pokemon obtained via Street Pass will be whichever starter Pokemon the passing player chose as their leader, while the Play Coins are redeemed to obtain more of the player's initial choice. Before selecting a stage, the player must designate how many Pokemon they intend to take with them, with any remaining Pokemon after a stage's completion being lost. Stages are made up of different challenge types, with 3 different types in total: Battle, Sneaking, and Obstacle Clearing. Battle stages involve the player defeating Pokemon in order to advance to a stage, with a battle gauge on top of the screen indicating how the fight is going. If the bar reaches the left, the player loses, while if the bar reaches the right, they win. This is manipulated by sending additional Pokemon into the fight, while the enemy may also send in additional reinforcements, with type effectiveness having influence over a squad's power. After each fight, the player may lose a number of their Pokemon. Sneaking challenges have the player attempt to use stealth to bypass a fight. By holding down the X, Y, or A button, Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie will attempt to sneak past the opponent, only successfully getting past if they cross a threshold. If the button is released before they make it, they will retreat back to their starting position. The guarding Pokemon may stir and check behind them. If they see any of the player's squad making an approach, the stage will change into a battle scenario. If they don't spot anything, they will move closer to the player's starting position until eventually they spot the player's team and commence in a battle. Obstacle clearing stages face the player against objects which must be cleared by sending Pokemon in. A gauge on top of the screen will indicate progress, though unlike a battle, there is never any pushback. No Pokemon are lost during these challenges either, so it's more a sort of gate that can only be passed by having enough Pokemon to meet the threshold. If at any point during a stage the player chooses to stop their progress, the group of Pokemon that had been sent in will remain at the point at which the player quit, being able to rejoin the squad once they reach that point of the stage again. As a result of the Pokemon being expelled after a stage, a player's Pokemon count will become limited before long, leading to them needing to seek out other players to obtain more via Street Pass, or bolstering their initial leader Pokemon via Play Coins. This results in the game being almost impossible to complete in a single sitting, forcing it to be played over multiple days at least in order to progress. Initially, only stages 1 through 16 are available to the player, covering the story of Marilyn and Riot, who appeared in the 17th movie. Additional stages surrounding Argus and Millis are unlocked after stage 6, while 4 additional stages could be downloaded by players that attended a screening of Dancy and the Cocoon of Destruction in theatres, or other special events. By completing these locked stages, a code is awarded to the player to unlock an additional Master Ball that can be used in Pokemon X and Y. The Thieves and the 1000 Pokemon is the most recent regional exclusive Pokemon title in this video, but there's one game we didn't mention yet, and it comes with a request for help and a $550 bounty. A demo for a PC edition of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, subtitled Gold Rescue Team, was released in the midst of 2007. It was available exclusively in Korean, with the demo being distributed as a free download to anyone who made an account on the Korean Mystery Dungeon website. The demo's size invokes an interesting possibility, being 450 megabytes. The demo took up far more space than what is needed for the limited segment that is playable, leading many in the community to believe that this data may actually contain the full game. Information on this game is immensely scarce, with the only real discussions around it being held on Korean message boards, with essentially no preservation of the original files. To this end, the community is looking to get hold of this demo, with the hopes to reverse engineer it and make it playable. It's a big ask, but consider this a signal boost. We've left a link to more information about the game and the $550 bounty in the description.
Hello and welcome to Region Locked. We've covered numerous RPGs on Region Locked. Often, these games remain in Japan because they're a brand new IP that perhaps hasn't garnered the audience, or possibly the translation effort alone would be too much of an undertaking to bring it westward. However, in this video, we're covering the sequel to the now beloved cult classic RPG, Earthbound. Finally, we're talking about Mother 3. Developed by Nintendo subsidiaries HAL Labs and Brownie Brown, now known as 1UP Studios, Mother 3 released for the Game Boy Advance on April 20th, 2006. Mother 3 takes place sometime after the events of Earthbound. The game's story spans multiple characters, each with their own plot, and a variety of them joining the party only temporarily. The main focus of the title is Lucas, beginning when he is just a young child in Tazmily, a small village located in the Nowhere Islands, which doesn't have any form of currency. The villagers are all happy and work together to provide for one another. Twins Lucas and Klaus go with their mother, Hinawa, to visit her father in the mountains outside of the village. While there, the boys spend their time playing with the wildlife, Dragos, small dinosaur-like creatures. It doesn't take long for aliens wearing pig masks to appear and begin throwing explosives and setting fires in the forest. The boy's father, Flint, helps to protect the village and its inhabitants. Rain extinguishes the fire, and it's at this point that Flint finds out that his family are yet to return from the mountains. Flint sets out to find his wife and children, and the villagers split up, working together to find them. In the mountains, Flint comes across pigmen, creating bizarre creatures, amalgamations of both organic and robotic material. He finds their notebook, revealing that they think animals suck, and that they want to make them tougher and rougher. Flint then finds his children have been discovered by the villagers, who are keeping them warm by a fire after they fell into the river and had been washed ashore. After a short rest, a villager runs to Flint, informing him that his wife has passed away. She had been found with a Drago fang having pierced her heart. Flint, distraught and unable to contain his rage, grabs a log from out of the fire pit. Lashing out in front of his children, frightening them and the villagers, he attacks several citizens of Tazmily before being knocked unconscious. When Flint awakens, he finds himself in prison for his violent crimes, being the first person to ever be sent to the prison in Tazmily village. After Klaus breaks him out with a nail file hidden inside an apple, he sets out to find his wife's grave. There, he finds an emotional Lucas, who reveals that Klaus has gone to seek revenge against the Drago. On his journey to find Klaus, Flint meets the Magypsies, a collection of people who have been hidden from the world for a long time. They are neither human nor animal, man nor woman, capable of gifting people with psychic powers. They reveal that they have assisted Klaus, providing him with a powerful psionic attack, and have set him on his way. Flint finds the Drago that killed his wife, and after a fierce battle with the creature, he refrains from killing it for the sake of its child. Flint, however, did not end up finding Klaus. These events set the adventure in motion, not with a triumphant victory, but rather a tragedy of anger and death. The game follows the same gameplay as Earthbound for the most part, with the addition of hot springs throughout the world to recover health, and saving being facilitated by speaking with frogs. A new feature of Mother 3 over earlier releases in the series is the inclusion of being able to perform combos during combat. When performing a standard melee attack, the player can attack an enemy multiple times by pressing the A button in time with the rhythm of a battle's background music, which differs between enemies. The player is able to attack up to a total of 16 times through this system, and if they are unable to determine the music's beat, they can put an enemy to sleep to make the beat more distinct over the melody. Series creator Shigesato Itoi had plans for a third entry in the Mother series as early as 1992, something he recalled in an interview with Famitsu that year. "I thought of it in the middle of the night. It was enough to make me rush and call my friend about it. Plus there's sort of a hint to it in Mother 2. I can't name any specifics because it's about the next game, but we're doing a CD-ROM for the Super Famicom." The sequel to Earthbound was first announced to the public in 1996, with the project being developed for the Nintendo 64. It did not take long for work to shift from the Nintendo 64 to the disk drive expansion, the Nintendo 64 DD. It was expected for the game to launch alongside the DD, but because of the team's lack of experience working with 3D and the new hardware, the title was continually delayed. 4 years after being announced, the game was cancelled in August of 2000. Satoru Iwata claimed the game was 30% done, while Shigeru Miyamoto said that it was about 60% finished, but neither wanted to release the game without it being 100% completed. The game was a huge undertaking for the N64 DD. In a discussion with Itoi, Miyamoto, and Iwata, the group divulged their extensive plans for the game. It's an RPG with 12 chapters, so each person has a different playing experience, something I'd never do now. But at the time, my ambitions were really out there, so I had ideas for how to run each chapter. I'd have one chapter work as a normal RPG, another chapter of just cutscenes, and another one with a game that had overlapping timelines, having 3 of the chapters made completely of still images and text to act as transitions. More information was slowly released as the game was being produced. It was planned to have more than 10 playable characters, each used for different chapters, with some main characters returning in other chapters as side characters for the party. The game was hoping to achieve a unique playing experience for each player. For example, a character could plant a seed in an earlier chapter and then find it has grown into a tree in a later one, helping them reach the top of a cliff, whereas another player might find an alternate path. A player might drop some food from their inventory in a certain location, which would then later attract enemies. The game was hoping to use the 64DD's internal clock, having night and day reflect what was happening in real time. A demo of the game was showcased at the Nintendo-sponsored Space World 1999 event, under the name Mother 3: The End of the Pig King. It contained playable sections in which the player took control of Flint, such as navigating a desert canyon, engaging in classic turn-based battles, riding a pork bean, exploring a snake-filled dungeon, and a town in which the player can interact with townsfolk. Several cutscenes were also shown, including footage of a band playing a song, Boney the dog running through rain, a character riding a dragon next to a bullet train, and a minecart scene with Lucas and Klaus speeding through caves and dungeons. IGN claimed this scene was clearly the visually most impressive sequence. Iwata blamed himself for the first cancellation of Mother 3. He said he wasn't available through much of Mother 3's production and spent a total of 3 months going back and forth to America. Both Miyamoto and Iwata claimed that the start of production for Mother 3 was unusual due to a lack of the trial period normal games go through by prototyping a rough version. Believing that the team from Earthbound would just transfer across all of their knowledge from the previous game's development, they jumped straight into the project, requiring new staff to be brought in to work on the game that hadn't had experience from the previous title. With these extra people on board, HAL Laboratories had to produce more games to have the funds to pay their staff. In the same interview, Iwata said that when creating Earthbound, the team managed to break past any proposed limitations the SNES had. The same mentality was carried forward to the N64 when creating Mother 3. This meant the production got out of hand, and with Iwata not on site for a lot of the production, when he returned, he spent 9 months going over what had already been produced, rather than progressing with the development. Iwata was even hospitalized at one point from overwork and stress on the project. Different measures were taken to try and get the game released for Christmas 1999, including bringing on some of the staff that had worked on Pokémon Stadium. The team tried to get the game down from 12 chapters to just 7, but this still did not help. The date of release was moved to the following Christmas. However, by August 2000, the decision had to be made as to whether to sacrifice all of the other games that HAL had in the pipeline, or to simply just cancel Mother 3. Though it seemed like Mother 3 would never be completed, Miyamoto, on the day of cancellation, was already contemplating what format Mother 3 could take instead, such as being adapted into a film or book. He even proposed shifting development over to the Game Boy Advance, though this idea was shot down by several other producers. However, this idea came to fruition 3 years later in 2003, when brought back to life with the team going back to working with 2D graphics on the Game Boy Advance. The main inspiration for Mother 3 was Le Grand Cahier, or The Notebook in the West, by Agatha Christoph. It's the first book in a trilogy about twins surviving in World War II. Itoi claimed in an interview with MyCom Inc., it's similar to an RPG, and it has an incredible presence. Lucas and Klaus, the protagonist twins from Mother 3, are named after the twins in the book. Itoi also claimed in an interview with Nintendo Dream magazine that the David Lynch TV show, Twin Peaks, and J.J. Abrams' Lost, which he was watching at the time, were the main inspiration for Tain Island. It was his intention for the island to reflect the player's worst nightmare, and the temporary dialogue which was used during development was so unpleasant that he had to rewrite it in order to tone it down. What started off as a glitch during development actually ended up being used. When Mr. Saturn gives the player the Franklin badge and leaves, bidding farewell, he ends up sitting only slightly off-screen. While this was not done intentionally, Itoi found it to be amusing, and so wrote dialogue for him and kept it in. There's also a large volume of unused content in Mother 3's data, including a favorite food item which would heal a party member for 300 HP. A bizarre unused image of the Summit Inn Cafe, that is located on Route 66 in California, can also be found in the game. It's assumed that this was to test the GBA's graphical capabilities, but some have speculated that it may have been the inspiration for the Dirty Cafe in Chapter 5. The game is littered with many references to music, so much so that we can't list them all, but here are just a few. The song Mr. Batty Twist is a clear reference to the Batman theme. And Enter the Pig Masks has a similar tune to a section of the Godzilla theme. There are also multiple references to classical music. The track Lieder Gymnopédie is a cover of Satie's Gymnopédie No. 1. And Ode to Ancestors' 8th movement is a medley of various tracks composed by Bach, Vivaldi, and Handel. The enemy, Gently Weeping Guitar, is a reference to the Beatles track While My Guitar Gently Weeps. The 7 Magypsies, a tribe of humanoids who guard the 7 needles, were named by the game's composer, Shogo Sakai, with each one a reference to the 7 modes in music. Ionia is Ionian, Doria is Dorian, Phrygia is Phrygian, Lydia is Lydian, Mixolydia is Mixolydian, Aeolia is Aeolian, and Locria is Locrian. The GBA contains a CPU dedicated to playing Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles on the Game Boy Advance, which Mother 3 uses in order to play 2 tracks in the game, an 8-bit variation of No Eating Crackers in the Cinema and Porky's Porkies. There were actually 2 music albums released for the game in Japan, Mother 3 Plus and Mother 3i, as well as a digital release on iTunes in North America, though it has since been removed from the store. Mother 3 Plus released on November 2nd, 2006, and contained music from Mother 3, as well as some tracks from the original Mother and Earthbound. The album was composed by DCMC, also known as the Crazy Ken Band. Lyrics were added to the game's main theme, We Miss You, Love Theme, performed by Taeko Onaki. The song was created late into Mother 3's development in December 2005, just 4 months before the game was released. The Pigs theme was originally considered as the game's main track. Itoi requested a more emotional piece be used for a crucial scene towards the end of the game in order to give a greater impact, and wanted the track to be simple enough to be played with just one finger. Much like 8 melodies from the first Mother, which ended up in school music textbooks for children to play, he envisioned the same thing happening with the love theme from Mother 3. Mother 3 Plus was number 1 in Japan's Oricon indie chart on November 13th, 2006, and was 26th in the soundtrack chart for 3 weeks. The CD was also originally released with a Mr. Saturn mobile strap. Mother 3i was released just a few months later on February 6, 2007, and was composed by Shogo Sakai. It contained different tracks to those found on Mother 3 Plus, but across both albums, not all of the staggering 250 tracks featured in the game have been commercially released. While Mother 3 never saw release in the West, both Lucas and Klaus appear in Super Smash Bros. From Brawl onwards. Lucas was initially intended to replace Ness in Melee, but Sakurai decided against this after the continuous delays. Their appearance in the Smash series makes them the only playable characters to be from a game not released outside of Japan. Despite the online presence and popularity of Mother 3, Nintendo has continually teased the idea of the game receiving localization, but never committed. The reasons behind this decision have never been made fully clear, and so fans have made a number of assumptions as to why this might be. Above all else, people look to sales of the earlier released Earthbound on SNES. The game was notorious for its advertising, which many blame for its lackluster sales, as well as the fact that it was released while focus was moving away from the SNES. Despite this, the game has a strong Western following, and has shown reasonable sales through digital re-releases. Mother 3 was also created for the Game Boy Advance at a time when Nintendo had begun to focus on their newest handheld, the Nintendo DS. During 2006, several games were published by Nintendo for the GBA in Japan, but only 2 other titles were released in the US, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon and Game Freak's Drill Dozer. As well as this, some themes and scenes in the game would likely require altering for any sort of official release, but this might be an issue considering they are integral to the game's plot. A number of controversial subjects play central roles in the game, including the acceptance of death, animal abuse, and scenes of violence. Some important sections of the game also make reference to drug use, as well as a portion of the game that displays male-on-male kissing. A fan translation was created by a number of fans of the Mother series, led by Clyde Tomato Mandolin. The effort was sizable, with a large group coming together to not just hack the game to make the translation work, but translate the roughly 1,000 pages worth of script. The translation came about after fans tried their best to show an interest in the game internationally, but to no response from Nintendo. A few months after release, Nintendo announced that the company had no interest in translating the game. It would be only a few days after this statement that the fan translation was announced on the Earthbound community site starmen.net. It took the group 2 years to have the translation completed, with the patch downloaded 100,000 times in its first week. Co-founder of Starmen and general PR representative of the project, Reed Young, has stated that higher-ups at Nintendo of America were aware of the work being made. In an interview with Ars Technica, he stated, "Nintendo definitely knew about the project. We're not real comfortable discussing the details, but word of the project reached the highest levels of the company, at least at NOA. For whatever reason, they never interfered. Even now, we don't know if that makes us happy or sad, because we made it very clear that we would end the project immediately if they made any kind of announcement about their plans for the game's future." The translation is of significantly high quality, being released alongside a 200-page full-color player's guide created by the team of translators, comparable to the likes of commercially released guidebooks. Only a few alterations were made to the game, such as changing the name of Yokuba to Facade, altering some graphics to be more fitting with the Western release of Earthbound, and changing the dialect of some mice from Japanese to Cockney English. The group even made a public offer to Nintendo to use their translation, granting the company permission for full use without charge, though it seems to have been to no avail. The game saw a re-release on the Wii U Virtual Console in Japan in 2015, which sparked many in the community to push for Nintendo to also publish the game in the West. Despite some staff at Nintendo having made it clear that they are aware of the interest surrounding the title internationally, there has yet to be any official statement on the game's lack of release, or that it may be released in the future. Whether it will ever happen continues to remain a hotly debated topic, with the community divided, some claiming that its localization will inevitably happen, and others saying that it never will. Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. When the Wii was released in 2006, people were keen to learn about any new games that might see release with the unique take on a gaming console. Motion controls blew audiences away, changing the rules of what games are limited to. Today, we'll be looking at a game which was announced early on in the Wii lifecycle, but saw several delays before ultimately being dropped from publication in the United States. That game was Disaster: Day of Crisis. Disaster: Day of Crisis was released in 2008 for the Wii, developed by Monolith Soft and published by Nintendo in Japan, Europe, and Australia. The game involves the player attempting to survive several natural disasters while at the same time fighting against a terrorist organization and trying to rescue civilians. The game puts the player in the role of Raymond Bryce, an ex-US Marine and member of the International Rescue Team. During a routine rescue mission near the dormant volcano of Mount Agulhas, just as everything seems to be wrapping up, an unexpected eruption causes debris to destroy a recovery helicopter, with Ray and his partner, Steve Hewitt, now trapped on an erupting volcano. Whilst trying to escape danger, Steve leaves Raymond with an antique compass, with the promise that he would give it to Steve's sister, Lisa, in the event that he couldn't himself. Soon after, it's another eruption, and Steve Hewitt tragically sacrifices his own life in order to save Ray. Little did Ray know, this would not be the worst day of his life. A year after the tragedy, Ray has still been unable to forgive himself for his partner's death, lacking even the courage to face Lisa and tell her about what unfolded. Ray has since quit the rescue team, instead taking on the role of a public servant. He is asked to meet Special Agent Olsen from the Blue Ridge City FBI division, who informs Ray that a former Marine Special Forces unit called Surge has stolen an array of nuclear weapons and kidnapped the seismologist Dr. Davis, as well as his assistant, Lisa Hewitt, Steve's sister. The organization has issued demands to the American government, threatening to detonate their nuclear weapons should the White House not comply within the next 24 hours. Ray, after fighting over his internal conflicts, makes the decision to seek redemption and chooses to participate in the mission for Lisa's sake, vowing to save her after he was unable to do the same for her brother. Though Ray was only recruited as a liaison between both Agent Olsen and Blue Ridge City officials, he winds up being thrust into the middle of the situation, having to take on all of the terrorists within Surge's ranks almost single-handedly, after several extreme natural disasters unfold. Disaster plays in a variety of different styles throughout the adventure. With a total of 23 stages to play through, and several different goals throughout, the bulk of the game takes the form of a third-person adventure title. The player can move around environments, inspect items, and perform basic platforming skills. With the use of a stamina gauge, the player is able to sprint, and if the player catches fire, they must wiggle the remote and nunchuck. The player will have to traverse through dangerous terrain, so catching fire is to be expected. By shaking the Wii remote when a circular icon appears, the player is able to attack objects, opening new pathways, and obtaining items. The player can find a small selection of items, including ridiculously oversized hamburgers, meat, or drinks, which will be consumed immediately. Crackers and medicines can also be found, which will go into the player's inventory to be used at a later time. Ray is also able to take a deep breath to help clear his lungs after he's been caught up in smoke or toxic air. Clogged up lungs will have a negative effect on Ray's performance, and if his lungs become completely filled with toxic air, he will die. A heart rate is also displayed in the top left corner of the screen in the form of a red circle. As Ray's heart rate increases, this circle also increases in size. If it gets too big, the player's stamina will take a huge hit, preventing the player from performing physically demanding tasks. Throughout the game's events, a variety of other gameplay modes are introduced, requiring different uses of the Wiimote and nunchuck. During gunplay segments, the player must point the remote at their target and shoot like a light gun game, with the ability to take cover. To reload, the nunchuck must be shaken, and the player is able to focus zoom to get a more accurate shot, though this has its own focus meter that will be depleted. There are also a variety of different weapons available, though ammo must be found during exploration segments. Driving portions require the player to use their Wiimote horizontally, steering with tilt controls, and the buttons providing acceleration and a handbrake. There's also a variety of different smaller QuickTime events scattered throughout the game. While traversing levels, Ray can also call out to people who are in need of help. As Ray is also tasked with rescuing civilians, he must first locate an injured person before performing whatever task might be required. These can vary in nature, such as tapping a button to lift a heavy object, reaching out at the right time to grab somebody in danger, identifying, cleaning, and bandaging wounds, or simply just carrying them to safety, making sure to rescue the civilian before their stamina gauge is depleted. Survival points are rewarded based on the civilian's remaining stamina. The player is also able to find small icons which will also earn SP. By spending the player's earned SP, they can improve Ray's various stats, bolstering his abilities. Points are also rewarded separately for gunplay segments, which can be used to purchase new weapons or improve the player's current selection. Some weapons cannot be unlocked until a shooting range has been completed, testing the player's shooting skills. The player is also able to come across a variety of unlockable outfits for Ray, as well as additional weapons. After the game has been completed, a variety of new options are unlocked, including extra disaster files which explain more of the game's backstory, a final shooting gallery, movie and artwork galleries, and an alternate ending. An additional harder difficulty is also unlocked, called Real Disaster Mode. Disaster was originally intended to have a more traditional control scheme, prior to adopting a more Wii-specific style of game. The decision to move away from using the Wii's Classic controller or GameCube controllers was made by Nintendo, likely as a means of setting the title apart from something released on other or earlier platforms. It may surprise some to learn that a lot of Disaster's animations, particularly with its cutscenes, make use of motion capture. Footage of the game's motion capture actors shows that a lot of the characters' stunts, like flying away from explosions, were all created using practical effects, with actors being attached to a series of wires and thrown around a room. When being brought to a Western audience, several lines of the game's dialogue were changed at the request of Nintendo of America. The company was allegedly unhappy with much of what had been created, and had the game's voice actors re-record revised dialogue. Prior to this request, the game's Western release was allegedly practically complete. These changes can be seen in the game's European release compared to its original Japanese dialogue, such as the terrorist organization being renamed, from Storm in Japan to Surge in Europe.
Their name is Storm.
Storm. Never heard of him.
Their name is Surge.
Surge. Never heard of him.
Voice actors had already finished recording their lines with the organization under the name Storm, so they had to be called back to re-record. Another thing of note is the game's use of cutscenes. With many games, the introduction sequence will include snippets of the title, using existing visuals. But for Disaster, many of the shots which are referenced during the opening cinematic are clearly using higher quality assets than would appear in the final release. Why this decision was made, making later shots seem significantly lackluster compared to the initial presentation given to the player, certainly is strange. While Disaster wasn't released outside of Europe, Japan, or Australia, Raymond Bryce would appear in the United States over 10 years later, but only as a spirit within Super Smash Bros. Ultimate on the Nintendo Switch. In the early days of Disaster's development, plans for a North American release were put in place. The game was first demonstrated at E3 in 2006 in a non-playable video presentation. During this stage of development, only the classic controller was being utilized, with the title taking on a more action-oriented gameplay experience. A year after this demo, Monolith had reworked the game's interface in order to incorporate the system's Wiimote controller. Disaster Day of Crisis was initially set to be released very early in the Wii's launch window, but was severely delayed. Tadashi Nomura, one of the game's producers, puts this down to several issues. Firstly, the team had to come to understand the Wii hardware and what potential it held. And secondly, they weren't particularly familiar with anything but RPGs. After the 2006 announcement, more news was only revealed at E3 2007 during an interview with Nintendo of America marketing director Beth Llewellyn, who confirmed that the game was still in active development. In April 2008, Famitsu revealed a release date of July 3rd that year. But in May, Monolith announced that the game had been postponed indefinitely in order for the team to increase the game's quality upon its eventual release. August of 2008, and the Australian Office of Film and Literature Classification provided the game with an M rating, leading many to assume the game was close to completion. A week after this news hit, Nintendo confirmed, once again, that the game was still in development. Finally, the game's confirmed release dates were revealed: September 2008 for Japan and October for Europe. There is no single reason why Disaster never saw release in the United States, but rather the culmination of several problems. After the game was released in Japan, sales were exceptionally sluggish, selling only 15,000 copies in its first week. Nomura blamed poor sales within Japan as being the result of the region's playing habits. He argued that disaster movies and panic-based action were more popular with Westerners. Reviews were generally middle ground, or negative. This made it clear that the game would not be the shining success that both Monolith and Nintendo had hoped for. It would be a month later that the game would be released in EU territories, and this is when the Western world began to understand what the game had in store. During an Iwata Asks segment, Hitoshi Yamagami, the game's second producer, reiterated the team's struggles with an unfamiliar genre, and that they had already begun work on Xenoblade Chronicles before Disaster had been released. It's likely, after some of the more scathing responses to the game and lackluster sales, it was considered a better move to simply never port the title to US shores. While games journalists can have an impact when it comes to international localization, there is a more influential voice that may have been the true cause when it comes to Disaster Day of Crisis: the former president of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé. Upon release, Reggie was extremely vocal on his distaste for the title, calling it not just laughable, but also overpriced. Reggie said that he would keep an eye on the game's sales reception overseas in Europe before backing a North American release. I think it's safe to assume it really did not meet expectations, with continued delays having caused deteriorating interest from fans waiting for its release. The game's sales saw it failing to reach any charts at all. A shame, considering Monolith were keen to work on a sequel, already having several plans in draft. In general, Disaster Day of Crisis was not a blow-away, incredible adventure, but a fun romp with a few laughs scattered throughout. Not quite the cutting-edge, heart-pumping survival action that Nintendo had previously touted it as.
Hello and welcome to Region Locked. With the birth of the Nintendo 64, Nintendo realized one problem with their new foray in the console space. third-party support. Many other consoles, particularly those working with disc-based technology, had a plethora of third-party developers helping build the catalogue of games available on their systems. Nintendo, on the other hand, working with a more limited cartridge format, struggled to gain widespread support. They developed a new add-on for the Nintendo 64 called the 64DD, which would help improve the system's capabilities. Though this venture proved to be limited in execution, ultimately being released exclusively in Japan, Nintendo didn't stop there, also looking to help finance more independent studios specifically to release games on Nintendo's platform. Though more than 60 games were announced for the add-on, of the 9 games that did see a release on the 64DD by the end of its production, only one ultimately saw a port for Nintendo's next console, the GameCube. But it would not see publication in the United States. That game was Doshin the Giant. Doshin the Giant was developed by Param in partnership with Nintendo, who published the title in 1999 for the Nintendo 64DD, and 2002 for the GameCube. The initial DD release was exclusive to Japan, of course, as the system never left the country, while the GameCube port was published in both Japan and Europe. The game is presented through spoken narration by a native called Sodaru, from the island Barudo. Sodaru covers his face with a mask and tells a legend of a giant that rose from a sea as the sun rose in the morning, and would return to the surf at sunset. While telling this legend, Doshin, the friendly love giant, makes his appearance. The player takes on the role of Doshin, while Sodaru tells the player about the desires of the island's inhabitants, starting with a simple request such as having more trees or having their hills reformed. In return, the people of the island will shower Doshin with love, in the form of hearts, which in turn help increase his size. However, there is a more sinister side to Doshin. He is capable of transforming into a starkly contrasting version of himself, Jashin, the angry hate giant. With each passing day, the giant will return to the sea. The next day, Doshin returns, though this is not the same giant. Each day, a new generation of giant appears at its original size. This isn't to say that each day is starting anew, as each giant will be recorded, and the islanders' relationship with the giants will be inherited by their next incarnation. Sodaru suggests that the giant may be able to help unite the 4 tribes living across the land. No small feat, and something which will take up the majority of Doshin's time. Ultimately, the game's main goal is to have villagers create monuments towards Doshin, some out of love and some out of hate. Whilst this is the main goal of the game, the player is able to simply spend their time enjoying the island, tending to the villagers for as long as they like. Each in-game day lasts for about 30 minutes, and during that time the player can fulfill requests to bolster their reputation amongst the villagers of the island by improving their quality of life. These range from needing more trees, raising or lowering the ground, removing obstructions, or simply wishing for the gift of a flower from the giant. Doshin only has a few skills at his disposal, all based around his monumental size. He is able to manipulate the landscape by raising or lowering the ground, and his size also allows him to pick up objects and transport them, including trees, villages, and even buildings. He is capable of jumping in order to avert certain natural disasters, though because of his size, this will affect the landscape beneath him. When Doshin turns into his evil Jashin form, the ability to pick up objects is replaced with the ability to smash the ground, and to fire a shockwave which can alter the landscape. The button can even be held in to continuously fire. Doshin's size grows after the counter around the perimeter of the screen has been filled with either hearts or skulls, indicating love or hate respectively. If Doshin does something that pleases the villagers, hearts will start to form clockwise around the screen, but if he does something to make them hate him, skulls will appear anti-clockwise. The hearts and skulls are capable of overriding each other, as a full circle of only one type is required to make the giant grow. At times with the giant's growth, issues can also arise. Whilst being larger will allow Doshin to move larger objects or traverse the island quicker, he can also more easily crush villages and buildings under his feet. The villagers rely on a green energy supplied by trees, often required for them to construct new buildings. After some time, however, trees, like all living organisms, will wither away and die. By placing trees near a water source, their life can be prolonged. Placing the wilted old trees together will help them regain their vitality. Giant boxes also appear in a variety of places across Barudo Island, dropping from the sky or found under houses revealed after picking them up. Inside, the player can find a bunch of trees, love or hate, or even new villagers from a random tribe. The boxes can sometimes give clues as to what they contain. There are 4 tribes of villagers: red, green, yellow, and blue, with each starting in a different area of the island, all of which request help in building their village. Each colored tribe builds a different monument for the giant. By bringing villagers of different tribes together in uninhabited locations, they are able to start a new village tribe under a shared banner of their combined colours, which will in turn eventually build a new monument, with 15 of the monuments coming from various colour combinations of tribes. In order to start the construction of a monument, villagers will ask for a flower from the giant. Flowers grow in an area where there are 7 trees close to each other. Once together, they will wither and die, and 8 new trees will begin to grow in their place, as well as a small red flower. Only one flower can be used on the island at a time. If there are 2 or more, only one will survive. Natural disasters can occur around the island, causing destruction. This includes the appearance of tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, or the appearance of spirits known as naughties, who will appear and steal villages or trees. Doshin is able to counter these disasters, however, reducing their damage. After each day, the player is shown a list of the actions they performed, as well as a number of comments from the villagers, varying in their value. Positive, negative, or simply just indifferent. The game returns the player to a title screen in which they can review constructed monuments in the monument list, check their photos that have been taken in-game in their photo album, as well as check the stats of the previous days spent on the island in the Book of the Giants. Every new day, Doshin will start at the ornamental hairpin, an object which he is also able to move, changing where the player initially spawns on the island. The core concepts of the game remain the same in both 64DD and GameCube releases of the title. There is actually a sequel to Doshin the Giant, though it could be seen as more of an expansion. Roughly translated as Doshin the Giant, Tinkling Toddler Liberation Front Assemble, the sequel is a completely different game that requires the use of the original Doshin the Giant. The game takes place at the Doshin Exhibition 96, where Doshin the Giant has been captured, chained up, and stands center stage. The player takes control of a child who is whisked out of their bed and into the world of dreams, where they find the imprisoned Doshin. The expansion's perspective is 2.5D, with the main character appearing as a flat silhouette of a child, maneuvering around a 3D environment via a side-scrolling motion. The child has a heart meter that is continually filling up, resulting in a game over should it reach capacity. In order to avoid this, the child can tinkle hearts out. Doing so on signs and people will interact with them, and signs representing the variety of monuments found in the initial Doshin release. If tinkled on, the player will need to prove that they have a monument built in their base game by switching discs. If successful, a pavilion will be built in the sign's place in the dream world, as well as a queen companion appearing. This queen companion will set obscure tasks to complete in the original Doshin the Giant. If accomplished, the player will be rewarded with a movie. There are 17 movies in total to collect, each with the same title, More Than Giant. These movies are black and white scenes based around the original game. The player can also tinkle on other kids and challenge them to a tinkle contest, with the opponent joining the player's team if beaten, improving the player's tinkle ability. The aim of the game is to tinkle on Doshin, making him bigger, eventually big enough to escape. The game's creator, Kazutoshi Ida, said that at the start of his career in developing video games, he had set himself a personal rule to create 3 games: Aquanaut's Holiday, Tale of the Sun, and last but not least, Doshin the Giant. His initial entrance into game development was to create what he called games without a goal, something which would allow the player to not just be entertained, but to take their time observing and learning more about themselves, whilst they learned more about his games. In this sense, Kazutoshi's approach to game development was to create art over interactive entertainment. His focus is on kansatsu, or observation. It is through observation that people allow themselves to think of new ideas and explore more about the world, as well as themselves. Doshin began development as a Nintendo 64DD exclusive, with the game being released as a launch title for the system, one of only 2. In total, only 9 games were ever released for the system, with many games considered for development on the console ultimately being cancelled or shifted to new platforms. During an interview with IGN, Ida revealed that he believed it possible to convert Doshin to a cartridge-based title easily, only taking out a few features that would only work on the 64DD. He also revealed that the team behind Doshin was made up of only 6 members of staff, and that they were continuing to think up new ideas for Doshin on the 64DD, thus leading to the game's expansion pack. While porting Doshin over to the GameCube, some elements of the game were altered. The mechanic of requiring flowers for building monuments was not in the original release. Several monuments were altered. The ability for Doshin to slide down hills was added, and the GameCube release includes additional islands after completion, as well as multiple endings, whilst the 64DD only had one. Doshin was to be the mascot of the 64DD and RandNet online subscription service that was provided with it. Various items were available to be purchased, including t-shirts, the soundtrack, an art book for Doshin, and Doshin the official guidebook, which was also given away with the subscription. For the short time RandNet was available, subscribers were given a Doshin Christmas card on the second year, and a Doshin newsletter was included with the regular newsletter sent to every member. This, however, only lasted from December to September 2000. Doshin made his first appearance in the US with the release of Super Smash Bros. Melee, as a trophy shown holding a villager in his hands. Jashin would also appear, though both would be known as the Love Giant and the Hate Giant respectively, rather than their given names. One concept that had been considered by Miyamoto for the title was having the game take place across a truly spherical planet, but after presenting the idea to the team behind Doshin, they had already gone far too deep into development to go back and include such an idea. Ultimately, this concept would be given new life with the creation of Super Mario Galaxy. Within the data of Doshin the Giant is an unused graphic showing the face of a young boy, likely used as an early placeholder. The child's identity is unknown. Allegedly, the strange name of Doshin is actually a slightly modified onomatopoeia of the sound the giant makes when his feet tread on the earth. Param had told IGN in 1999 that the company was in talks with Nintendo of America to bring the original 64DD release to the United States in a cartridge format, as the 64DD was exclusively released in Japan, and thus would need to be converted to work on a standard Nintendo 64 console. Unconfirmed rumors also circulated that Infogrames were interested in possibly publishing the game in the US, but this also never came to fruition. Doshin the Giant's lack of GameCube release in the United States is actually related to the release of an entirely different game, one which wouldn't see release in Europe. Cubivore Survival of the Fittest received a release in America, another game which was initially created for the 64DD before transitioning to the GameCube. When asked, Shigeru Miyamoto said that both titles were being reviewed by Nintendo to confirm their suitability for international localization. Atlus announced later that they would take on the publishing task for Cubivore in the US, whilst Nintendo published Doshin in Europe, and both developed by two studios who operated as subsidiary groups of Marigold Management, a company that Nintendo had created to recruit independent game companies. The company, a joint venture between Nintendo and Recruit, a human resources company, was formed after Nintendo found the N64 lacking in third-party support. Marigold would provide the companies with financing, as to let the game studio simply focus on the creation of new titles, with the condition being that the games be ready within 5 years. The lack of American release for Doshin, but the presence of Cubivore in the region, suggests that Nintendo wasn't keen on publishing an extensive number of niche titles across the world, due to the risk of failure when it comes to returns on investment. Depending on your interest in gaming, it's either unfortunate for Europe that there was no release of Cubivore, or unfortunate for America that they would never be able to experience life as a giant just trying to spread a little love or hate.
Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. Skip Limited are a company best known for their work on the Chibi Robo series, which spans numerous Nintendo consoles. They're also known for their art-style games for DSiWare and WiiWare. While the majority of these games released internationally, Skip developed a game that never quite made it to the West, and has since become infamous online. Today, we'll be talking about Captain Rainbow. Captain Rainbow released in 2008 for the Nintendo Wii. The game's story follows Nick, a TV star in his homeland of Memurica. Nick is famous for his alter ego, Captain Rainbow, a superhero whose weapon of choice is a magical yo-yo. However, new and different superheroes become the latest trend, and Nick's ratings start to plummet. In an attempt to regain his popularity, he travels to Mimin Island. Rafting across the ocean, Nick comes across a small animal struggling in the water. Heroically, he transforms into Captain Rainbow and dives in to save them. Unfortunately, however, water is Captain Rainbow's weakness, mostly because he can't swim, and Nick is separated from his rainbow belt, the source of his power. Nick awakens on the shores of Mimin Island with the animal he tried to save alongside him. The mysterious creature then conjures a magical bangle around Nick's wrist. After seeing more creatures make off with his belt, Nick follows them and discovers a small village. There, he meets Hikari, a girl who cares for the shrine on the island. She also has the ability to see into the future through visions. She tells him that visitors come to the island to have their dreams come true. However, it has never actually happened. She goes on to explain that the person wearing the bangle is chosen by the stars, and only they can open the mysterious ancient stone door in the shrine and change the fate of the islanders. The player takes control of Nick as he attempts to befriend the people of Min Min Island by fulfilling tasks to help them achieve their dreams. He is awarded stars, or sparklies, by completing a variety of tasks and minigames set out by the inhabitants, or through exploration of the island. In order to fulfill a wish, the player must first collect 20 sparklies. This process must be repeated for each character. All of the residents of Min Min Island are early Nintendo characters who, for the most part, at the time, were relatively obscure or lesser used within Nintendo's releases. Hikari, who helps Nick when he first arrives on the island. She is one of the protagonists of the Japanese-exclusive Famicom Disk System title Shin Onigashima. Takamaru, the protagonist from the mysterious Murasame castle, who wishes to be able to keep his composure around women. Birdo, one of the few characters who reached a certain level of popularity within Nintendo releases. They have come to the island to become attractive and popular with men. The soldiers from the Japanese-exclusive game Famicom Wars, who seem to have given up their war-driven lives and instead express a wish to become professional volleyball players. Little Mac, the protagonist of Punch-Out!, who has let himself go physically. His desire is to train and become a world champion boxer once again. Osan, the playable character featured in the NES title Golf, often mistaken for Mario. He wishes to become a legendary golfer. Mappo and Tao, originating from the Japanese-exclusive GameCube title Gift Pia, Mappo wishes to become a detective, and Tao wants nothing more than to eat as many bones as he can before he dies. Lip, one of the playable characters from Panel Depon, released as Tetris Attack internationally, her desire is to become a great magician. Tracy, who sells Link medicine in The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, bearing little resemblance to her earlier appearance in Zelda, her wish is to enslave all men in the world. The Devil from Devil World, also a Japan and Europe exclusive title, his wish is to be the best villain in all of the underworld. And lastly, Gitcho Man from the Chibi Robo series, who wishes to understand the difference between right and wrong. Character locations and events change through a day-night cycle, requiring the player to be in specific locations at certain times. To assist with his journey, Nick is able to transform into Captain Rainbow after he recovers his rainbow belt. As Captain Rainbow, Nick can break rocks to clear paths as well as navigate the island faster with increased movement speed. While in his Captain Rainbow state, a power bar is displayed which depletes over time. To keep the bar charged, the player must find food to consume. Failing to do so will result in a game over. Captain Rainbow's skills can be upgraded throughout the game by way of belt modifications. The history of the island can be revealed by discovering rocks, known as schists. These provide more story and history surrounding the mysterious location. A number of collectibles are also scattered around, such as animals which Nick is able to log in an animal encyclopedia. By granting the wishes of 3 people, the player is rewarded with access to their own portable caravan, which can be moved by Captain Rainbow. In the caravan, it's possible to save, as well as sleep to progress time, as opposed to having to do so in Akari's house. While Captain Rainbow received a lot of attention online, very little action was taken to bring the game across the pond for an international audience. Sales of the game were few, with only 6,361 copies being sold in the first week of release, though reviews seemed mostly positive, with Famitsu scoring the game 31 out of 40, praising the gameplay, pacing, and musical score, though being put off by the often vulgar humor. Many of the themes presented in Captain Rainbow can be considered lewd. Such is the case with Birdo's story. Birdo has been imprisoned in a cage by Mappo, after he found her in the women's bathroom, mistaking her for a man. This is a reference to Birdo's historically ambiguous gender. Birdo asks Nick to prove her innocence, leading him to search for an item that he can show to Mappo as proof. This leads Nick to find an item which is only shown as a question mark, found vigorously vibrating underneath Birdo's pillow, suggesting that the item is in fact a female sex toy. A number of references are spread throughout the game, including the use of warp pipes a la Mario Bros., as well as portraits of both Mario and Link from The Legend of Zelda hanging over Tracy's throne. Low sales, controversial themes, and regional exclusive obscure characters likely gave Nintendo the impression that the title wouldn't be a strong contender overseas, or could land them in hot water with consumers. Despite this, a huge effort was taken by the translation group Kirameki, with the assistance of several other independent translators. Kirameki first began showing work on their translation in 2012, but after years of work, no patch had been released. While an almost fully translated script had been created, the team were unable to insert their translation into the game. It wasn't until 2016 when romhacking.net user Mark Arse reinvigorated interest in the project, ultimately releasing an incomplete patch in late 2017 using the original script posted by Kirameki. This patch is theoretically 95% complete and makes the game playable in English. Special thanks to everyone involved in this translation effort. It's impressive having continued passion for a project for such a long period of time. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Region Locked, we hope you'll consider giving it a like and sharing it with your friends.
Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. Back in 1986, Nintendo created a hardware expansion for the Famicom known as the Famicom Disk System, or FDS for short. This attachment allowed developers to create games using a higher capacity floppy diskette. The FDS never saw release outside of Japan, and as a result, several of its titles were never taken overseas. One of these titles was the mysterious Murasame Castle. The game was prominent enough for Nintendo to make a mini-game based on it for the Wii U launch title Nintendo Land. It was eventually released to the international market on the 3DS Virtual Console in 2014. But this was 28 years after the game's initial release, and to little fanfare. So why did it take so long for Murasame Castle to reach the West, and why is it still so obscure? First, let's take a look at the game. The game's plot takes place during the Edo period of Japan. During a stormy night, an alien falls from the sky and infiltrates a castle known as Murasame Castle. Within the castle is a stone statue called Murasame, which the alien then brings to life. From there, the alien's power then extends to the 4 other neighbouring castles and takes over their lords. Each lord gains a sphere that summons ninjas and monsters which are used to attack the villagers. The player assumes the role of Takamaru, an apprentice samurai who is sent to investigate the strange occurrences. Takamaru must defeat the lord of each castle before taking on the alien that powers them. Work started on the game when the team behind Zelda experimented with their engine. Their experiments led them to increasing the action elements of the game by adding more speed to the engine. Murasame was the end result of these experiments. The gameplay is similar to that of the original Legend of Zelda, featuring a top-down angle with no screen scrolling. In contrast to Zelda, however, Murasame Castle follows a linear path and has time limits for each level. Areas are made up of 2 sections: the approach from outside the castle, followed by the infiltration of said castle. The RPG elements from Zelda are also removed. While the game features levels that lead onto one another, the levels themselves have branching paths that can lead to dead ends and loops through the stage. Takamaru has 2 weapons at his disposal, his katana and an infinite supply of throwing knives. The katana, used for close range attacks, can also deflect various projectiles. The throwing knives can be upgraded through various collectibles found throughout the game, but these are lost whenever the player loses a life. Collectibles include fireballs and a bladed wheel. Takamaru also has additional skills that can be used, such as an invisibility cloak that makes him invulnerable for a short period of time, and a lightning bolt that kills all enemies on screen. The player is also able to obtain lives by rescuing damsels found within the game's castles. Sometimes, however, these can be demons in disguise, ready to ambush the player. The demon will follow them throughout the castle from screen to screen and will only stop if killed. The game is considered to be incredibly difficult due to the high volume of enemies that appear on screen at any one time, their speed of attack, and the fact that the demons can appear when attempting to gain extra lives. The enemies are primarily made up of figures from Japanese culture, such as feudal ninjas, samurai, hanya, and tengu. While the game lets players attack enemies using the katana at close range, once they reach the second level, this becomes a relatively meaningless approach, as several enemies will explode when they're hit. Additionally, enemies will start to throw fireballs at the player, which the katana is unable to deflect. The spike in difficulty between each level is considered to be extreme, as it only takes 3 hits before a life is lost. Several enemies that can only be hit with precise timing of a ranged attack begin to appear within the castles. This also has to be done while dodging a large number of projectiles being thrown at you. Enemies will often change patterns on each playthrough, making memorization a tricky if not impossible task. The reason for the game's lack of initial localization has never been officially stated. Many believe the game's intrinsic Japanese theming made Nintendo question if it would appeal to Western players. It's also possible that Nintendo simply considered the game too difficult for non-Japanese players. The title was also delayed during development, originally intending to be released alongside the Famicom disk system and Zelda. Some reason that this impacted the game's sales. Murasame Castle sold roughly 610,000 units in Japan, but they only had about 150,000 downloads via disc writer kiosks. These kiosks enabled users to overwrite their Famicom discs with new games for a cheaper price. Nintendo might have used the kiosks to gauge player interest, as Murasame Castle had some of the lowest rewrite figures on the system. For comparison, the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, known as the Lost Levels in the West, had over 1 million rewrites from kiosks. To get a better idea of what might have happened, we asked an ex-localizer for their opinion on the game. They told us the lack of localization was probably due to the game's Japanese theme. In the late 1980s, the US market didn't buy overly Japanese titles enough to justify localizing them. However, the market shifted over the years, allowing for online distribution, and digital publishing costs are much lower than they are for physical media. And with eShop accessibility, there's a greater chance of niche titles being released digitally at reduced cost and risk for the publisher. Another example of this can be seen with Fatal Frame Maiden of Black Water, which was originally a Japan exclusive. Fan outcries showed Nintendo that there was a big enough audience to justify a digital release, and the game was brought to America via Wii U eShop. Despite the game being absent in the West for decades, Murasame's legacy can be seen in many titles published in America. The game's first appearance outside of Japan was in Pikmin 2 for the Nintendo GameCube. The Cosmic Archive treasure is in fact a copy of the Murasame Castle disc. The game also has a few connections with the Super Smash Bros. Series. Not only does Takamaru make an appearance as a sticker, but the Murasame's musical theme can be unlocked for the classic Mario Bros. Stage in Brawl. You may also know that Takamaru makes an appearance within Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS as an assist trophy, but he was actually considered for the role of a playable fighter. This idea dates back to the development of Super Smash Bros. Melee. It's believed that Takamaru's inclusion in the game was scrapped because of his relatively obscure status. Sakurai stated that he was considered again for the fourth game in the series, but was again put aside because of lack of popularity. Takamaru's appearance later inspired the design of the Mii sword fighters, including his haircut and outfit. Japan has also seen two more references that didn't make it to the West. Another Japan exclusive title, which we'll explore in a later video, is Captain Rainbow. Takamaru takes on a very prominent role within the game, appearing as an anxious young man who gets nervous around women. WarioWare DIY also includes a micro game exclusive to Japan. The player has to simply avoid shurikens from several ninjas while assuming the role of Takamaru. This was replaced in the West with a micro game based on Pikmin that plays entirely differently. The Wii exclusive Samurai Warriors 3 features a large reference to Murasame with the inclusion of an extra mode titled Murasame Castle Mode. This gives the users the option of playing as Takamaru. By completing more of the main game, it also becomes possible to play as Takamaru within the game's other modes. One of the more obscure pieces of media to come from the game was a TV drama produced in December of 1986. It was an adaptation of the game starring the cast of the all-girl pop group Onyanko Club for the TV series Monday Dramaland. The series was known for its adaptations of popular culture. Though clips of the episode have proven difficult to find, the episode was released on a DVD box set in Japan.